he's always storing like songs in his mind that he's always waiting to use in the movie. Like he'll listen to a song, or he knows a song, he's just waiting for the right opportunity to use it. And before the digital age, he had tapes and tapes full of dozens and dozens of songs that there are songs for ideas that he would use for a movie in the future. Like I have 300 songs in this library on tapes that at some point they're songs I want to use. I don't know when I'm going to use it. I'm going to find the right moment at some point, but they're there. They're stored.
Hello, movie friends. Welcome back to the show. We have a very big topic for today. The greatest filmmaker of all time, in my opinion, Martin Scorsese.
Top 5 in my book for sure.
Whoa! How high up in the top 5 is he?
He's probably top 3.
Really?
He's a legendary filmmaker.
Who do you have ahead of him?
Well, I don't want to get into that too much because this episode's about Martin Scorsese, and it's a list that's always changing. It's very subjective, but he's definitely one of the best filmmakers of all time around the entire world, not just in American cinema. And we can't wait to talk about him. We've only done a handful of his movies we've talked about. We've talked about Goodfellas. Mm-hmm. We've talked about, what else have we talked about from Martin?
We did Taxi Driver in our third episode.
We haven't even done
Back in the day.
So we've hardly actually done Martin Scorsese movies because, we've been saving that bacon in the freezer, even though he's one of our favorite filmmakers.
You're saving so much bacon.
We're going to do Departed very soon, but he is a legend. He's one of our icons. He's one of those filmmakers. His movies make you fall in love with film the first time you watch his movies, and then they're so rewatchable. I mean, I remember when I saw Goodfellas for the first time and Taxi Driver for the first time. They were life-changing movies. It's like when you find a new band and it kind of changes your course of life and the way you look at the world. Martin Scorsese movies was one of those early filmmakers for me who made me see the world differently in every facet of life. And I think he's so important because of what he's done for film and cinema, the preservation of cinema and film over the last several years because of everything switching from film to digital, but preserving film and old films and still shooting on film. I think he's probably the most important filmmaker over the last 50 years in the world as well, bringing audiences attention to international film outside of America, in Hollywood, in Europe. So I think that's been really important as well. But he is such a passionate filmmaker. I connect with him so well in his movies and his characters, and I adore the guy.
Well said.
Thanks, man.
The Beatles were the band for me that did that.
Yeah, they changed your life?
Like when I started listening to them in my 20s. It really changed things. But I would
Wasn't VeggieTales?
It was not VeggieTales. What's VeggieTales?
It's a kid's show.
Oh, okay.
They have a couple albums.
I think that Martin Scorsese is, since the invention of film, he's the most important person in film's history, not only as an artist, but also, like you said, the film preservation, because he does a lot of work behind the scenes that most people are unaware of. He has the Martin Scorsese Film Foundation. He also has another film preservation foundation as well, where he both helps bring international filmmakers into the light, filmmakers from all over the world, and then he also preserves old films. And the problem with film, actual 35 millimeter or 60 millimeter film, is that it doesn't last, and it needs to be stored in a precise way in order for it to withstand the test of time for some time. At the most, film can be preserved for at maybe a couple hundred years in the perfect conditions, but then it needs to be put onto a new reel of film in order to preserve that film. And unfortunately, many films from the past were not preserved correctly. They were not stored correctly, and a lot of films were destroyed. There are famous filmmakers who have work that has just been lost and will never be found again. But Scorsese, for decades now, has been preserving films from all over the world, from filmmakers of every walk of life, whether they're famous or extremely unknown from some international country. And it's an amazing thing to think that someone would love the craft so much, to work so hard and so diligently to preserve its history. It's important. I think it's the greatest art form that humans have ever created, is the all-encompassing film, because it shows every facet of human life, life itself, emotions, stories, but also audio-visual. You're watching the image, you're hearing the image. It accesses so much of us. And whereas a painting is just visual and music is just audio, the combination of the both creates something really special. And then you throw in the storytelling element. And storytelling is a part of human existence. It's so important to the fabric of being a human. So I think that's why film is the ultimate art form. And Martin Scorsese, I think, is the greatest storyteller in the history of film. And it's film, it would not be what it is today without him.
Absolutely not. He is a genius. He's got an encyclopedic bank in his mind for film, the history of film, movies from the past that no one's ever heard of. His knowledge is immense and extensive.
If you watch interviews with him, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, people always talk about like Quentin Tarantino has like an encyclopedic knowledge about film. Like Scorsese is like that as well. He's a highly intelligent guy and incredible storyteller. But I think he's also such a rarity. He's kind of an anomaly where, you know, there have been many filmmakers who withstand the test of time in terms of making films over a long period of time, multiple decades. And, you know, the average filmmaker, it's kind of like a professional athlete or anything arts related or talent related. They might be a one and done and it's over. A couple albums for a musician, then it's done. You're just playing.
They never hit that
You're
high.
playing those hits from the 90s forever for the rest of your life. You know, you're not making new albums.
You're Papa Roach, you know?
Yeah. Boom, roasted.
Cut my life into pieces.
Is that Papa Roach?
I think so, yeah.
Dun, dun. A lot of filmmakers have like stood the test of time. Like Ridley Scott's a filmmaker who's been making movies over several decades. And there are plenty who have done it, but there are maybe only a couple who have done it in every decade. They arguably have made the best film of that decade. I mean, the 1970s, Taxi Driver, arguably the best film of the 1970s. 1980s, Raging Bull came out in 1980, so it still counts. Arguably the best movie from the 1980s. 1990s, Goodfellas. Come on, it's the best movie from the 1990s, arguably. Then also still staying so relevant in this new millennia, and in his 60s, making The Departed in 2006. And that being not the best film of the decade, probably, but it's up there. It's a fantastic film.
That decade, Gangs of New York, The Aviator, and The Departed.
Exactly.
In that decade.
In the 7-year period. Those were all made from 2002 to 2007.
Yeah.
And then also in the 2000s, making The Wolf of Wall Street, which is a legendary movie.
It's become a cultural phenomenon.
And also Peppering in Silence. And
Shutter Island.
And Shutter Island as well, 2010. So what he's done in terms of staying so culturally relevant and still at the top of his game, 50 years later, he's in the 70s now, you know, but still doing it in a new century, 5 decades in a row, staying one of the most highly talented filmmakers, but also adapting to the times, adapting to whatever material he's working with, which is one of his great strengths, which we'll get into in his style of Martin Scorsese, but also adapting to the changing world and changing culture with how he's telling his stories. Because obviously Taxi Driver, you can't make that today. That movie does not work in today's culture. However, in 70s culture, it was a masterpiece.
Yeah, he is. I think it's a great point, because this is a reason why Tarantino only wants to make 10 films, because he doesn't want to make movies that are down a grade from his other films. Because some of the greatest filmmakers ever, they had lackluster final years, and you can argue that Ridley Scott's a great example of a guy. He makes some misses, man. He's made some of my favorite movies, but he makes some misses. And the thing, what separates Scorsese, and you made a great point, where even at this old age, even as the culture and the world has changed so much, he still is just as relevant of a filmmaker as he was in the 70s and 80s, when in his heyday. To make a movie that is so huge on social media, like The Wolf of Wall Street, in his 70s, that's so incredible. Like, to think that a movie that Scorsese made at his age is such a cultural legendary status thing on TikTok or on Instagram. It's unbelievable to see how he still connects to audiences, and his movies still resonate in some way to the wide mainstream audience, because his movies have never been extremely successful. His movies never make a boatload of money. I think Shutter Island is his most monetarily successful film.
Yeah.
Then The Departed is up there as well.
Yeah, Departed pulled 300 mil. Then Wolf of Wall Street is pretty successful.
Yeah, those three are outliers in his filmography. Those made a few $100 million each. None of his other movies, I think, even topped $100 million. His movies don't make money, but his films, they are so incredible in terms of what they mean to the art form. And I also think that Scorsese is such a misunderstood director by the younger generations. Oftentimes, people always just think, like, we get so many comments still to this day of people saying he only makes gangster movies and he only makes crime movies. But it's the opposite is the case. It couldn't be further from the truth. Most of his movies are not in the crime genre. Most of his movies are not mob movies. He's only actually made a handful of mob movies, and he's directed, I think, over 40 feature films.
No, I don't think it's that high. It's
I'm thinking of documentaries included, but I think around 30 feature films.
something like that, maybe a little
And
less.
to only have 5 of them be mob movies, like how he's not a mob director. And what I also think separates him from any other filmmaker is his ability to really connect to the real world. His films, he never pursues fantasy. He never pursues sci-fi. He never pursues the fantastical in any way. All of his movies are about real people with real world problems and human stakes, real life, authenticity. He has always avoided those other genres, even though he's a big fan of sci-fi. He's a huge fan of, horror. He doesn't really touch those genres. Fantasy, I'm sure he loves lots of fantasy movies, because what makes him so special is he connects to humanity in its core with his films, with his stories. His movies are just about people, and flawed people with real world problems that anyone can relate to in some capacity. And his movies always feel so grounded, and I think in a lot of ways so relatable, even when they're larger than life characters like Henry Hill or Jordan Belfort. You can still relate to them in a lot of ways, and I think that he really cares about the personal and personal experience and trying to translate the simple fact that everyone has a story to tell. Everyone's life is a story, so then anything can be a story, and it doesn't have to be superpowered. It doesn't have to be fantasy. It doesn't have to be science fiction based. And so I think that also separates him, because if you look at his filmography, he never pursues those genres.
Yeah, you could probably say the most fantastical movie he's ever made is probably Hugo.
Yeah.
And that's not like a fantasy movie, but there's like a magical quality to
It's his
that.
approach to the filmmaking that makes it feel magical.
And it's
But there
a
is
3D. It's a 3D movie too, which is really cool. And even James Cameron, who's obsessed with 3D and pioneers that in theaters with Avatar, he said that Hugo is the most well-shot film for 3D he's ever seen in his life.
It won the Oscar for cinematography.
So that's just a great movie, but that's maybe the most fantastical.
But even then, there's no real magic. Though that movie it's translating. Film is magic. That's what that movie is.
It's about movie
That's
making.
the theme of the movie.
Yeah.
Film is magic.
Exactly. And so when you go through his filmography, you realize he hasn't made a ton of gangster movies. He's made a lot of crime movies, and a lot of dark characters. But as he's made as many spiritual films, as many religious movies. He's got a lot of motifs of religion in some of his crime movies as well. Like one of my favorite shots of religion that he has in any of his films is in The Departed, when the portrait of the Mary comes crashing down on the guy's head on the sofa when he's sleeping and gets waken up like that. So like Marty's a very deeply religious person. He's Catholic, and he inserts that motif in a lot of his films. Some of his films that you wouldn't notice are highly spiritual. You go back and rewatch them, you realize, holy crap, Mean Streets is a very spiritual film.
There's like 10 minutes in churches of that movie.
I mean, he made a movie, obviously, about the last temptation of Christ, of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
He also made a movie about the Dalai Lama with Kundun.
Kundun.
Is it Kundun or Kundu?
Kundun.
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 I know it's I don't know. If
Actually, I'm not sure
I
how
think
to
the N
pronounce
might
it.
be silent.
It
I'm not
could be,
100% sure. But he made a movie about the Dalai Lama, as
Yeah.
well as one of his biggest passion projects recently when he made Silence. He finally got to make that movie that he's been trying to make for 20, 30 years. So
I love that movie. I watched it last night.
he's so misunderstood, like you said, in terms of the kinds of movies he makes. A lot of people don't see most of his filmography, and not to mention, you look at Martin Scorsese now. Like, let's say you're new to film, you're a film student or something. You're young. You're like, oh, I'm starting to discover movies. I'm starting to discover Martin Scorsese. Of course, I know he's made Goodfellas, The Departed, Taxi Driver. All these movies are
Casino.
great. So you assume in your head that, like, since he's such a successful guy and he's had one of the greatest careers a director could possibly ever dream of having through his hard work, that you think he's always been like that. He's always been this great success. But Martin Scorsese spent the entire first half of his career punching up from the film academy, the institutions of film that kind of pushed him away or didn't want him because of the kinds of movies he was making that they didn't want. And, like people like Brian De Palma or Steven Spielberg, who he grew up making movies with, Coppola, their movies were so much more successful than his. And they were getting all these awards and recognition from the Academy, from institutions, whereas Martin Scorsese did not win an Oscar until 2006 with The Departed, when he was 64 years old. Are you kidding me?
Crazy.
He had 5 nominations before 2003 for Academy Awards. He's only won 1 Oscar in his career.
That's
which is
insane.
absurd. When you look at that, you realize this guy has been kind of shunned by film institutions for so long, and it was so hard for him to get movies made. A lot of his movies, like you said, very few have made a ton of money. A lot of his movies were bombs and busts at the box office. I mean, Taxi Driver was a pretty decent success, but like half of his movies that he was making in the 80s and 90s were not very successful. Raging Bull wasn't a super successful film, but it might be the best movie he's ever made in his entire life.
I think Raging Bull is the best sports film ever made, and it's two reasons. I think the content that he put into his films and the tone. It's so rough and it's so nitty gritty and it has a vulgarity to it and such an attitude to it, and just like an FU to traditional cinema or of the time cinema, that the Academy and critics didn't want it in a lot of ways. And yes, he was acclaimed in with some of his films, but to not even win an Oscar for Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, and Goodfellas is ridiculous. Goodfellas, I don't believe it was nominated for any Oscars except for De Niro for acting.
He was nominated because he lost to Clint Eastwood.
For Unforgiven.
For Unforgiven. So actually, Scorsese's lost like almost all of his Oscars to actors who also directed movies. He lost
Robert Redford.
He lost an Oscar to for Best Director. Clint Eastwood. I can't remember somebody else, but he's also his movies.
Kevin Costner.
Yeah,
Dances
with Wolves. Exactly. So his movies have also lost Best Pictures to movies directed by actors.
Oh my God, I never realized
it's a weird
that
statistic that he's had in his career.
But also, he's always been ahead of his time. Taxi Driver was ahead of its time. Raging Bull was ahead of its time. No one had ever seen a sports film like that. And still to this day, there has never been a sports film made that even comes close to the artistic integrity and creativity and ridiculously remarkable tone that he crafted with Raging Bull, of both disturbing nature, disturbing characters with striking story and visuals. And I think that Raging Bull might be one of the best works of cinematography in history, as well as editing. The fact that movie didn't win an Oscar for editing by Thelma Shoemaker, the great editor, is just a ridiculous thing to even think about. And then you look at Goodfellas, got very little critical acclaim, but now it's regarded as one of the greatest films of all time. And I think Goodfellas is probably the most rewatchable movie in the world ever made.
I think Pesci was the only win that was for that movie.
He won, yes. He won
Pesci
supporting
won.
actor. Thank you.
It was my privilege. Thank you.
Yeah, that's all he said. Yeah, it was my privilege. But there's this thing that happens, and I actually fell victim to it, and I'm guilty of it, of judging Martin Scorsese negatively, because for me especially, and I think that there might be plenty of young people when they hit a certain ages, especially their teens, where you're rebellious. And when I was a teenager, I didn't want to listen to the Beatles because everyone said they were the best, and I didn't want to watch Martin Scorsese movies because everyone said he was the best. And I looked at Scorsese as the gangster guy. I also was like that, and it was clout. Like on my MySpace page, I had a Goodfellas poster and a Casino poster, and that's
in a cigarette.
In a cigarette, I was holding a bottle of vodka. That's actually true. That's a 16-year-old.
That's an insecure teenager.
Yeah, that's insecurity trying to fit in. And I viewed Scorsese as he's the gangster movie guy. That's how I looked at him. And then as I got older and grew into my late teens, and then I realized what he was, and I watched Taxi Driver. And when I watched Taxi Driver for the first time, it was really like a life-changing movie for me, where I realized, who is this guy? He isn't just like the Casino guy, because our brothers liked Casino and Goodfellas. That was on a lot. And then I watched Taxi Driver, and then I watched Raging Bull, and I watched a lot of his older movies, and like Mean Streets and all the After Hours, which is great. And then it really made me change my perspective of him, of being a great director. But then over the last 10 years, the more you watch his movies, the more I've seen his movies over and over again, the more you realize he's the best to ever do it. And no one has ever been able to use the medium of a film the way that he has. And you can look at you can point out similarities in his style from film to film, but also he changes his style if the film needs it. Silence does not have any pans, tilts, crazy edits. The music is very minimal. If you compare Silence to Goodfellas, in a way, it feels like a different filmmaker. And even compared to Taxi Driver, also feels like a different filmmaker. And so he has a lot of trademarks, but then he will use them if the film calls for it, and then change his trademarks and change his style depending on what the film needs. Like Last Temptation of Christ doesn't have a lot of these things that people think of as signatures. When people think of signatures, they think of like the crazy pans and the tilt downs and
Tracking.
the tracking, the fast push-ins, Steadicam shots. That's present in a lot of his movies, but not in all of them. And you could say that the greatest strength of him as a filmmaker is being able to adjust the craft to suit each film. And he has utilized every kind of technique that can be done in cinematography and editing in his movies. And no one has ever done any of them better.
Yeah, I mean, if we just stay on Martin Scorsese's style for a little bit, what is Marty's style? Is he someone like Wes Anderson who has his own style? You watch a Wes Anderson movie, Wes Anderson has his own unique style.
I will say, I'm glad you brought Wes up, just to sidetrack for a sec. Wes has a lot of Scorsese in him.
Yeah.
The pans, that's Scorsese. Scorsese was doing that for years, and the push-ins and the zoom-ins also as well. Like Wes Anderson, you could tell he's so inspired by Martin Scorsese as a filmmaker. Well, also the insert shots. Scorsese is so underrated for his insert shots. Like, they are amazing.
Yeah, you're right. But let's stick to the style thing. So I want to bring filmmakers up because we have so many filmmakers that you can think of that you love that have a very specific style. You put a movie on, you're like, that's a Wes Anderson movie. You put a movie on, that's a Christopher Nolan movie. We're playing with time. Maybe the plot's a puzzle. You know exactly what a Chris Nolan movie looks like. You know what a Quentin Tarantino movie
David
looks like.
Fincher.
David Fincher with the palettes. Exactly. The color palettes.
And the camera movements.
Exactly. You know exactly what a David Fincher movie is, and there's probably a serial killer involved, so that's part of it as well. But Martin Scorsese easily might be one of the only great chameleons when it comes to being a director. Like Anthony was saying, he changes his style depending on the project, whatever it calls for. I mean, you watch Taxi Driver, it's not even close to the same kind of style as Goodfellas. It's not even close to the same style of something like The Irishman or Silence. And then we have a movie like Hugo. Then The Gangs of New York is completely different too. He's playing with new trademark things like shutter speed and stuff like that. So like Anthony said, he has his trademarks, but those trademarks don't exactly define his style. Martin Scorsese's style is kind of hard to explain. I have a great quote from him as well.
Thank you, yeah.
Where he said, talking about style, this is a quote from Marty. "I can't talk about my own style. I don't know what that really is. Other people do it if they want, but I don't know how to." So Marty himself, he can't even explain his own style because he changes for it. I mean, look at Raging Bull. It's completely different than every other movie in his entire filmography. Yes, it's black and white, obviously, because they wanted to differentiate that from Rocky, which he had just lost Best Picture to in 1976 with Taxi Driver when Rocky came out and won.
I also think he shot black and white to show the real contrast of blood, and then also to really help hide the background. I think those are his two motivational factors. That's my guess.
True, but they wanted to make it different than Rocky because everyone associated like a color boxing movie with Rocky because they were still fresh in the zeitgeist. It had just won Best Picture.
Yeah.
Taxi Driver lost to it, which was his first huge defeat because Martin Scorsese consistently lost and got snubbed at the Oscars, not just for Best Director and Best Pictures, but many of the credits where many of his movies were nominated for several awards and they walked away with no wins or maybe just one win here and there, which is wild because they're some of the greatest movies of all time. But his style completely changes, you could say. Not completely, but in specific movies, sometimes you're like, is this even a Martin Scorsese movie? Then like you see an element where you know it's a Scorsese movie, but he's able to adapt to the story for bringing the story to its height, to his highest, the highest strength it can be, if that makes sense. That doesn't make sense at all. But you know what I'm trying to say.
No, I'm glad you brought it up. Because when you watch a Wes Anderson movie, they always, and after his first three movies, they always feel like a Wes Anderson movie.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. I love him. And also another trademark of Scorsese that he was inspired from is the slow motion push-in. Mean Streets is a perfect example. So if you look at Mean Streets, there's the scene revealing Robert De Niro's character, Harvey Keitel, sitting in the red bar, and then De Niro walks in across the room. We have a slow motion push-in of Harvey Keitel while he's watching De Niro approach him with two girls in slow motion. What's that make you think of?
What does it make me think?
Royal Tenenbaums. When Gwyneth Paltrow shows
Yeah.
up, and there's a couple other
Super slow mo
movies
shots
where with a rock song playing. With he music is a huge thing we'll get into in a little bit, but there are trademarks to Scorsese movies that he likes to utilize if he can, and if it suits the story. I think that slow motion, while we're on it, it's used to great effect by Scorsese. He could be the greatest user of slow motion. Raging Bull is remarkable in its use of slow motion, especially the opening credit where Jake LaMotta is just airboxing in the rink. We're seeing the beautiful title credits by David
the wide
Perry.
shot, yeah.
Also, The Color of Money has a lot of great slow motion shots to show the pool play. Taxi Driver, great slow motion. Lots of Travis Bickle walking, showing his disconnect from the world. Goodfellas, a lot of the kills are in slow motion. When Joe Pesci kills Sam Jackson, slow motion. Also, a couple of the other kills, slow motion. Really incredible things. And that push-in with the Cream playing of De Niro smoking the cigarette, slow motion. Amazing uses of slow motion in that film. Gangs in New York, there's a lot of fights going on that are in slow motion. And then also Wolf of Wall Street, the lewd scene. The lewds, Steve, man, the lewds. One of my favorite sequences of slow motion, with just like the beer pong just falling into the glass and the water beautifully spraying across the pool table and splashing onto the green velvet of the pool table, and just beer spilling on top of the pills.
Gangs of New York, the Bible falling into the water.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful slow motion
beautiful shot. People would be surprised how often he uses slow motion in his movies, and it's to great effect. Like, it's never been done like him. It's incredible. And he uses it in certain moments when it really has a great, powerful effect on the story being told.
Yeah, he just doesn't use it just for fun as a filler.
It's not like 300 where it's like slowing down this cool shot. And that is cool. But it has meaning behind it, not just to look cool.
Many of his movies have great meanings behind it. I mean, there's this constant theme and motif of religion and spirituality in a lot of his films, whether you notice it or not. Like I said, go back to Mean Streets. That movie is very religious and very spiritual. And just look at Harvey Keitel's character in that film, the lead character. And, you know, he's very religious. He's always repenting, but at the same time, he's a low-level criminal. And he kind of treats him and his cronies around him like they're kind of like their own congregation at a church. Like, we have funny moments where like he's blessing things and at the bar that's like their church, and like there's always this kind of connection between whether it's the mob or the church, where you see similarities between the two. Religion and the mob, you know, these organizations, they're in control of a lot of people's lives and a lot of locations. They have a lot of money, but also like the mob is kind of like the same way, where people, you worship them or you're in control. You have power in a neighborhood. You have power amongst people that live near you. So it's really interesting where that's where he grew up, you know, Little Italy in New York City. All he was surrounded by was crime, organized crime in churches.
He said growing up, being a young man, you could choose two paths. You could either be a criminal or you could be a priest. He said when he was a kid, those were his two options that he thought existed.
He wanted to be a priest because he didn't want to be a criminal, and the priests were the only people that the criminals didn't, you know, go after because they were protected by the sanctity of religion. But he grew up, you know, in a poor family. His parents were first generation from Sicily, and he says he grew up in kind of like a little Sicilian village in New York City. Like, his Little Italy was like specifically like full of Sicilians, and his mother, Catherine Scorsese, she's made a bunch of cameos in his movies, as well as she's also in The Godfather Part 3 with a cameo as well. And his parents both worked in the garment district. His mother, when she was young, before their parents met, before her and her husband met, she was sewing dresses for dolls. And then Martin Scorsese's father was a dressmaker and seamstress, and then they actually lived next door. Their windows were like 5 feet apart from each other when they looked out their bedroom windows. They got married on the roof of their building.
Very
right there.
cute.
And Marty grew up, he had an older brother, but he grew up in this very poor area. His father did pretty well for a few years, but they went to even more poverty, I think in the 50s or something like that. But that's how he grew up, in this small neighborhood. And that's why, you know, Italian families, there's so many people around, and especially these small communities. And I can only imagine what it was like. It was probably like what a family gathering for us was around the holidays. It was probably every day for people like this, growing up in these very tiny apartments full of people around the neighborhood. And he really brings the energy of that culture to his films. But because Scorsese might be the best at creating authenticity, in the entire history of film because he brings so much authenticity to whatever project it is. And he brought that first to Mean Streets for sure. It feels like where he grew up. He knows New York probably better than any other filmmaker. And, you look at Goodfellas and other movies like that. He brings so much authenticity there because he knows so much about it. But then like a movie like Raging Bull, where he has no idea anything about boxing, but manages to make the best boxing movie of all time because he brought so much authenticity to it because he's great at research and he knows how to bring that element to any story.
That's a great point, and you could clearly say that Mean Streets is his most personal film for all those reasons. And then the authenticity thing, that really comes from two things, the production design and the wardrobe. And the production design of Mean Streets it's terrific because it's all on real locations. Scorsese, he often shoots on real locations, or if not, he builds sets that look real and they feel real. And the wardrobe is always like spot on, and so much thought and care goes into wardrobe that people don't realize. I think The Departed is an example. We grew up in Boston. When I saw Leo wearing that hoodie with the sleeves rolled up and the black hat,
the Black Boston hat,
I was like, that's a Boston outfit.
Looks like my cousin.
That looks like our brother. It's such a Boston outfit. And then Mean Streets in the 70s, I mean, in 60s, I'm sorry. I'm sure those suits with the big lapels of the shirts, and I'm sure that was what everyone was wearing then. But also the production design, and he likes things they don't have to look perfect. Things feel lived in, environments feel weathered, homes look like people live in them. And the wardrobe also adds so much to that. I mean, just look at De Niro's wardrobe in Casino. Suits his character personally. He's perfectly. He's boisterous. He's outgoing. He loves attention. What are his suits? Colorful, flamboyant, pinks, greens, oranges, bright colors. And then you compare that with Pesci's suits, more subdued colors, minimalist. He doesn't want to be seen. He doesn't want people to know who he is. The wardrobe is so important to movies and to characters. He really understands that. And then you have Henry Hill, who's got to be like the coolest dressed character in the history of movies. He's up there. Like that shot
when Rags to Riches plays the car.
We start with the shoes. We see the shoes first, and then we pan up. We see the suit with the great striped polo. He's just smoking a cigarette. He's got the gold chain. So cool. But it tells you everything you need to know about the character. He's a criminal, but he's immaculately dressed with extremely expensive shoes and a $200 suit. Like, the clothing is always just pitch perfect in Scorsese movies, and the production design as well. When you're in a bar, it feels like a bar. When you're in a home, it feels like a home. I love how much work and how much care he puts into the production. That it's not just acting. It's sets and wardrobe are such important factors, and that, I think, is the biggest strength to creating the authenticity you're talking about.
For every film, he's like this. I mean, just to stay on those two, Casino, De Niro's character, Rothstein, right? He has, I think, 80 wardrobe changes in that movie, which is absurd for a movie. That's a lot of different outfits and, like, very expensive suits and
but all sorts of colors.
Robes and stuff like that. So really expensive wardrobe, but, like, picked perfectly.
And the sunglasses.
Yeah, everything like that.
The big sunglasses.
And then also, I mean, just to stay when he made Boardwalk Empire, the first episode cost $14 million. They spent $5 million just on wardrobe, let alone all the sets that they built. And then Henry Hill with Ray Liotta. Martin Scorsese would personally tie Ray Liotta's tie every day on set because it needed to be the exact perfect way that the gangsters that he grew up around wore their ties and wore those big-ass collars hanging out over the V of the tie. So he would tie Ray Liotta's tie on set because he's that in tune with the attention to detail. Then something like Gangs of New York, which is such an underrated movie and such an underrated production in general.
Yeah.
The attention to detail in that movie is astounding because they built all these huge, massive sets. It's one of like the last great big sets of Hollywood, you can argue, without any green screens or anything like that. But he brought so much authenticity to a movie like that because, you know,
when you're in the 5 Points, it feels like it's the 5 Points. It's a real place.
Even the interiors of those big buildings were like the bar and the dances. But like he'll read the book of Gangs of New York that's based off of. But then that leads him to so much more research as a director and storyteller and filmmaker that he's pulling in all these little details that he learns about in his research for filmmaking. Like what was it? The ears in the jar that is at Gangs of New York. That's something he pulled from something else that he read about the time in New York in this era. So he's so in tune with the attention to detail with his movies that brings so much authenticity to his films that it's rivaled by no one how much authenticity he brings in.
So much authenticity.
It's an important word, I think, for his filmography. It's a big word.
And then
for
you
him.
look at outfits like Cape Fear, the
Counselor.
the red Hawaiian shirt.
Could you be there?
Could you be there?
What the fuck's the difference?
What the fuck's the difference? And the red Mustang. And then you look the wardrobe and the props of Wolf of Wall Street, like that you need it to feel real, and it does in a lot of ways. Hugo, beautiful wardrobe and costume design. Last Temptation's excellent. Taxi Driver, I mean, he's wearing that jacket.
Well, actually, Taxi Driver, all the wardrobe that De Niro wears in that movie as Travis Bickle, he took from Paul Schrader's closet.
Really?
He went to Paul Schrader's apartment.
The writer of the film.
Yeah, he's like, because he was trying to make that movie for so long, and then Scorsese got attached finally. He went to Schrader's apartment, went through his closet, and he's like, I'm wearing the maker of Travis Bickle, I'm going to wear the clothes because you created him. So, like, all the wardrobe he wears, like that red suit, the outfits, the t-shirts, the jeans, those are Paul Schrader's clothes.
Oh, it's amazing. I love that. And the color of money is great.
The jacket, I don't know 100% about the green jacket.
I would say the green military jacket they
that
probably
might be pretty
got.
specific.
Yeah, I doubt Schrader had that.
But a lot of the wardrobe, like that red suit, belonged to Schrader.
And then, but period pieces, you have Gangs of New York and The Age of Innocent.
Won an Oscar.
Unbelievable costuming. Like Michelle Pfeiffer's clothing, Winona Ryder's clothing, unbelievable. And then also Danny Day-Lewis's suits are remarkable. Like, incredible costuming in that film as well. That's probably, I mean, that definitely deserved the Oscar. And then you look at Shutter Island with Leo's suit. Like, it's just like, it feels right. It feels good. But the attention to detail, the production design of his films, it's so remarkable. And you can see, like, it's such a big factor to why you buy into these worlds, why you buy into the story unfolding before you. And even though he does use a lot of green screen, especially nowadays, the use of miniatures is still heavily present. Shutter Island, so many miniatures. Wolf of Wall Street, a great amount of compositing of different things. Like, they would green screen plenty, but then they'd also get a shot of something and then shrink it down on the screen and just insert it, composite it there into the shot. So it was filmed, but it was just composited into the frame of whatever they're filming. It's just remarkable how, even to this day, he's still able to keep up with the advancements of technology and use modern technology better than probably anyone, because he fools audiences so much with how much green screen he uses nowadays, how much CGI is used in his films. Wolf of Wall Street is filled with CGI, but it doesn't even feel like it.
It blow people's minds. There's a great behind-the-scenes video on YouTube of how much green screen was used in The Wolf of Wall Street. It would blow your mind. There's so much in it.
The same thing with Shutter Island. It's absolutely mind-blowing.
They did blue screens on Shutter Island.
Oh, well, if they're in interiors. If they'll use green screen in exteriors.
I'm just kidding.
You're just being a wise ass.
Well, they did use blue screens.
Raging Bull was actually all green screen.
Yeah, it was a completely green screen movie. Rotoscoped all day.
So there's another great trademark of his that I'd like to discuss, and it's his use of the color red. Now, the color red is used famously in films, but it can show danger, display power, tell the audience something about the scene or what's going on with the character. And Scorsese is an incredible user of the color red. And now this isn't just, he's not just color correcting the screen red. He's using red lighting or red colors.
Like Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore has a great red exterior shot. I'm trying to run through the biggest ones in my mind. My favorite's got to be Goodfellas with the brake lights on the car in the opening.
So that's, I think, the best use of it. The opening scene of Goodfellas with the brake lights lighting the scene of them digging the grave. Mean Streets, the bar sequence where we meet Robert De Niro's character, that bar is just all lit red. And like I said earlier, it has that great slow motion 2-shot with Rolling Stones Jumpin' Jack playing for that sequence. Taxi Driver, there's a lot of great shots of red light pouring onto Travis Bickle's face. Incredible uses of both editing and color. Bringing Out the Dead has a lot of red in it as well, with red lights pouring onto Nicolas Cage. The Aviator, the sequence where Howard Hughes is locked himself in that film room, and he's just pissing in mason jars, and then there's that red light bulb that keeps flashing, and the room gets filled with red, and his face is just covered with this flashing red light. Really remarkable. The Departed, when Jack Nicholson is watching the opera with the two women and there's just red light pouring on top of him. It just shows like the sinister quality, the danger of the character. And King of Comedy also, in Rupert Pupkin's basement, the talk show set he had built where he just talks to the paper cutouts of celebrities. The background behind him is just like this deep red. And it just surrounds him. And it's just a beautiful shot. Very simple, but it's there for a reason. He wants you to see red in these scenes. He wants you to notice it. He wants to create a feeling. The striking nature of red, it contrasts with everything. Red is the most contrasting color. Like you throw it on any other color, it just really pops. And when you throw it in a frame, it's more noticeable than any other color, especially if it's a brighter red. Like I'm looking at your set. What's catching my eye? The Jurassic Park sign. It's like lighting up in front of me.
What about me?
You're not lighting up in front of me.
I'm lit.
You are well lit. But the color red has so much power and magnetism in visual stimulation when an audience is watching a scene. And he understands that, and he uses it to great effect.
That's a really good point. I love his shots of red, for sure. And, he's had so much influence on so many movies that you probably wouldn't even know. I mean, he produces so many films, but even a movie like The Godfather, he had a huge influence on that film because he was, like I said, he grew up being friends with Francis Ford Coppola. He met him at a film festival in Sorrento that he went to. Sorrento, Italy.
Wow, that's cool.
Italia. So that's where he met Coppola, and then he was friends with Spielberg and Brian De Palma, all those guys. John Cassavetes was a huge influence on him and really steered his career in the right direction because before he made Mean Streets, Marty was a film student at NYU. And he was making short films and was getting some work being a director for
Roger Corman.
Can't remember the name of the movie.
So he did Boxcar Bertha.
Yeah,
and Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. So Boxcar Bertha.
But he did Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore after Mean Streets.
I'm sorry, after Mean Streets. So Boxcar Bertha was his first feature.
That's the one he was fired from.
So really?
Yeah, so he was fired from that, but they finished the movie and it was actually it got a ton of critical acclaim. It wasn't very successful, but he was fired before the end of that production because
who's that knocking at my door?
Yeah, so he had a lot of bad situations and he made mistakes in his career with the films he was making.
But also, Roger Corman, he funded those two movies. Who's that knocking at my door? In Boxcar Bertha. Roger Corman is a famous film producer for making B movies and exploitation movies.
Cassavetes was like, you should it's a fine movie, but like you're way better than this.
Yeah. So Corman, what he would do was he would make movies as fast and cheap as possible, and just make profit off them because they were so cheaply made and made in like 2 weeks. But they were often just bad exploitation movies. Lots of sex, lots of just softcore porn sex. You know what I mean?
Yeah, every 15 minutes they need an explosion and boobs.
Yeah, exactly. But he was just known as being the cheesy B movie producer. He actually also produced James Cameron's first movie and also another famous director's first movie. I can't think of it off the top of my head. I can't remember. Coppola's first movie. I believe Coppola's first movie was Roger Corman produced, and.
Yeah, because Coppola got him that job.
Exactly. Yeah. So it was Coppola. And so Roger Corman, he gave the money to make a movie, but like you don't want to be associated with that for your career because he was just like cheesy Roger Corman movies. And then Cassavetes was a very accomplished, he's a great actor and director and writer. And then helped him be like, there's another producer as well, the guy who produced Mean Streets and funded it. He saw the Corman movies he made and was like, "You're so much better than that. What do you want to make?" And so this producer, I can't remember his name, asked Scorsese, "What kind of movie do you want to make? You have the talent." And then that's how Mean Streets was made. That producer saw his early work and was like, "You are something special. I want to give you money to do something. What's it gonna be?"
But Marty also, he had a family at the time. He had a kid, he had a wife he was supporting as well. So he had to kind of take work where he could find it at the same time. He had bills to pay, so he couldn't just make whatever kind of passion project he wanted to. So he was very broke. He was a broke filmmaker for a long time. There's like a great joke where Coppola said to him, like, you have it easy. You're broke. I'm $50 million in debt.
I feel like Coppola was always in debt until like the 2000s, until like 2005.
So, and he even before all that, Martin Scorsese, he worked on the big Woodstock documentary that came out that, like, I think it was just called Woodstock. It was a huge box office. It made like $50 million for Warner Brothers, but he was on part of that production. Like, he went to Woodstock, which he hated because he's like a very neurotic kid. He was always in the infirmary. He was always sick. So this was like the last place he wanted to be, like the loudest place in the world, drug, sex, and rock and roll. But he was actually part of that production. He actually worked on some other music documentaries that were made as well.
Yeah, so we won't get into them because there's so many. He's always been a prolific music documentarian. He's made documentaries for, he made a great George Harrison documentary, a great Bob Dylan documentary. He's done a ton of live concerts. Like, he did a great Rolling Stones concert. I did
Michael Jackson's Bad music video.
That's his only music video, though.
Yeah,
I think.
Bad. No, he's done another one for some other guy.
Okay,
yeah,
some other guy.
I can't remember his
but
name.
he's made like 50. He's made like 15 legitimate documentaries. Like, but most of them are music based, and this stuff's great. Like, if you want to watch them, like, watch the Bob Dylan one and watch the George Harrison one is really sensational. It's an amazing documentary. So it's amazing, but we won't get into it because that's a whole of the filmography. But it is a really great aspect to his career as a filmmaker and director. Those documentaries.
Mean Streets, it was so important, and Coppola invested in it as well. And
that was nice of him.
The thing with Mean Streets is it got rave reviews, critically acclaimed. Filmmakers loved it. Film critics loved it.
It won something at Cannes, I believe.
It won. It was at Cannes. I don't think it won anything, but it was at Cannes, which is a huge achievement. And so this was like Marty's like first like critical success. And
I'm sorry to stop you. There's a great quote. I watched an interview of him where they had the premiere in New York, and his parents were there, and he didn't think anyone was going to watch it. And then during the premiere, he realized how vulgar the language was, and he like felt bad that his mom was there. And then he said when the movie was over, his mom went out into the theater lobby, and every time someone walked past her, she would go, "We never use those words in the home." I don't know where he got it from, but we do not talk like that.
Catherine's very religious, and obviously that rubbed off onto him. But Mean Streets, he finally got distribution. And once it got picked up and sold and distributed, it failed at the box office. It was Warner Brothers who picked it up. And so not only did Warner Brothers kind of advertise it as like more of a mob-looking movie, which it's not really a mob movie. It's just about criminals. But they advertised it as like a new mob movie, which wasn't exactly authentic to what it was really like. There's that word of the day. But also, they didn't bring up...
And this is before The Godfather, so mob movies back then were more action-driven, lots of shootouts.
Yeah, there's not a lot of that in Mean Streets at all. And then they also didn't advertise or showcase the fact that it was at Cannes, which was a huge achievement. And also, 3 weeks after the release of Mean Streets, they released The Exorcist. So
one of the biggest movies of all time.
The most successful movie of all time at the time.
Yeah.
So no one was going to see Mean Streets. No one even cared about Mean Streets anymore. It was only out for 3 weeks. Then The Exorcist takes over every movie theater, every box office. And then after The Exorcist comes out, there was a major re-release of A Clockwork Orange and then Deliverance. So Mean Streets was basically just lost in the ether of public consciousness. No one really saw it. Didn't make a lot of money. But, it got him recognition with the film community, with the film world, with studios. His name was out there now. This movie helped build a reputation for him to take his career a little further. Then he made Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore because Ellen Bernstein was recommended him by...
Very famous actress.
She was just in The Exorcist.
Yeah, very famous.
And she was recommended Marty to make that movie because she wanted to make that movie. She's a superstar. She's huge. So obviously famous actors, they get to kind of handpick their projects at a point in their career, which she did. And she chose Marty based off, I believe it was Coppola's recommendation to choose Martin Scorsese to do Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. But also with Mean Streets and almost every other movie of Martin Scorsese's filmography up until Wolf of Wall Street, he was battling the MPAA in ratings. Every time a movie came out, he had to cut things here and there. Taxi Driver, we'll get into in a little bit, was almost a life-changing disaster for him where it was getting an X rating. And it wasn't until The Wolf of Wall Street where he finally got true creative vision for doing whatever he wanted with the movie with final cut everything he wanted, and obviously the new changing times.
He might have cut out some of that plane sequence.
In The Wolf of Wall Street, who knows? Wolf of Wall Street is the most F-bombs in the history of film.
But also that changes with the culture. We've talked about
True,
that.
yeah.
The culture and what's accepted by the MPA has changed.
Yeah. Obviously, yeah.
Yeah.
Different time.
But and also speaking of Mean Streets, nobody knew who Robert De Niro was. Nobody knew who Harvey Keitel was. Harvey Keitel was in De Niro's first movie, Who's That Knocking at My Door? But that was like, nobody saw that movie. It was
In one of his short films.
Yeah, it was like this black and white movie about a couple, and nobody saw it. It's a Roger Corman production, like I said earlier, and Corman actually forced them to make a sex scene to put it in there because it was too boring, he said. And nobody knew who Harvey Keitel was. And De Niro, I think it was his first major role in a feature film, being in Mean Streets. But when you see him, you're like, oh my God, this guy, he's just like, when he's on screen, he electrifies the screen. And
that's why Coppola was like, I'm putting you in Godfather Part 2.
Yeah, for real.
You saw Mean Streets.
I remember the first time I saw Mean Streets, it was after I had seen so many De Niro movies, and then I saw Mean Streets, and I'm like, oh my God, like he just magnifies the screen in such a way where you can't take your eyes off him. You can see why once Scorsese started working with him, he's like, you're my guy. Because he had worked with Keitel as the lead in two of his early movies, but then when Taxi Driver came on his radar, he's like, I got to go with Bobby.
Well, actually, he wanted Harvey for Taxi Driver, but De Niro and I can't remember. I think the studio or the investor wanted De Niro versus Keitel. Keitel was Marty's first choice, but then like Marty got the part. I mean,
but I can't picture Keitel as Travis Bickle.
Exactly, it doesn't really work.
He doesn't. Keitel is a great actor, but he has a limit to what he can do. De Niro has no limit. He is a limitless talent, and that's why he's arguably the greatest actor to ever live, because he can do anything. Whereas, like, I couldn't see, and that's why he and De Niro kept working it, because obviously with Taxi Driver, he probably realized that. Because if he wanted Keitel for the lead, he was probably like, you've been my lead in two of my movies. I got to have you as my lead again.
My short films at NYU.
You're my pal. Like, we have a great working relationship. But I'm sure with working on Taxi Driver, he saw the sheer brilliance and just untapped potential of talent that De Niro had. Because then they made 8 movies together. You couldn't picture Harvey Keitel playing Rupert Pumpkin.
Travis Bickle.
I mean, you could see him maybe as Jimmy Conway. Not the same, but you could see him do that. But a lot of what De Niro has done has been chameleon-esque. And Keitel is not a chameleon-esque actor.
No, I get that for sure. And De Niro, I mean, with Taxi Driver, he, was one of the guys who wanted to get that made so bad. He loved the script. He loved the story Paul Schrader had. And he had actually signed on. I think he was going to get paid like $32,000 to be Travis Bickle. And then he won his Oscar for The Godfather. And so his agent was like, "You gotta hit 10 times on that button and ask."
When you get the Oscar,
he's like, "You need to ask for 10 times that amount of money." And this was gonna basically ruin the production because they didn't have a ton of money to make that movie, Taxi Driver. But because De Niro wanted to make the movie so bad, he believed in Martin Scorsese so bad, and he wanted to do the project. He kept his salary at $32,000 even after winning the Oscar. And many other actors would have just, I need 10 times the amount of money that I was originally offered. I am an Oscar-winning actor now. $32,000, he still got paid to do it. So he saved that production as well. They probably would have had to go with a different actor, and it wouldn't have been the same movie.
No way. And Taxi Driver for me, it's such an important movie to my upbringing in film. My own upbringing of myself.
You raising yourself as a child, as a baby from your womb.
Because you grow up hearing it. First of all, I want to say I think it's so bullshit how the stigma against Taxi Driver nowadays, and how it's like if you like Taxi Driver, you're like a problem guy. I think it's such BS. And how liking Taxi Driver American Psycho means you're like a Sigma male problem. I think it's really one of the greatest character pieces ever put on film. It's a remarkable piece of storytelling, and it has a lot to say. It's not on the surface. I think people judge it on the surface. They don't really understand the context of what Scorsese was talking about, what Schrader was talking about, what the movie was even about. And people look at it on the surface as a guy who goes on who wants to kill people, but it's so much more than that. And it's such a powerful piece of art. And I remember when I saw that in the basement of our old apartment,
Anthony's movie dungeon.
I watched it for the first time, and I was just like in awe. I'd never seen anything like it before. And that's, like I said earlier, when I began digging into Scorsese, because I was just curious about the legendary status of this movie and why it was on the top lists of so many people. And I just finally watched it, and I was like, that's unbelievable. But I don't like the stigma it has nowadays, because
it's really unfair.
It's really unfair, and it's made by people who probably haven't even watched the movie.
And what does that say about women that like Taxi Driver? I know plenty of women and girls that love Taxi Driver. It's like one of their all-time favorite movies. Goodfellas is one of their favorite movies.
Yeah.
American Psycho is one of their favorite movies. What does it say about them?
Yeah.
It's really not fair. It's like the incel term is what they're using a lot for, like these, like the guys that like love that kind of stuff. It's
the loner cinema.
Exactly. Yeah. It's really unfair because it's just a remarkable film. I mean, he won the Palme d'Or Best Director at Cannes Film Festival when this movie came out. It's a masterpiece.
It really is one of the greatest films ever made.
It absolutely is. And actually, it got bumped out of the top 100 on IMDb user rating list.
It's not in the top 100?
Not anymore. Actually, so he actually has, at this moment, Martin Scorsese has 7 movies in the IMDb top 250 user rating list. So Taxi Driver actually, got bumped out of the top 100.
I think it's because of the modern culture.
I think so, too.
Yeah.
So Goodfellas is his highest rated movie. It's number 17 on IMDb's user list at an 8.7. The Departed is at number 39 with an 8.5. Taxi Driver is at 114 with an 8.2. The Wolf of Wall Street is at 133 with an 8.2. Casino is at 136 with an 8.2. Shutter Island is at 145 with an 8.1, and Raging Bull is 157 with an 8.1. That one's the biggest shock to me. Like, Raging Bull should be in top 50. It's one of the best movies ever made. It could be Martin's best movie. I totally understand Goodfellas being at 17. That's a perfect number for me personally with Goodfellas.
Yeah, The Departed is way too high.
But Taxi Driver, it's too low now at 114.
The Departed is way too high, and Taxi Driver is way too low on that list. That's ridiculous.
It's just interesting how it's changed so much, because I remember for years Taxi Driver was like top 50, top 75.
I think modern culture doesn't like that movie, and it has like we were just saying, an unfair stigma against it.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's been getting review bombed in the last 5 years.
Probably by people who haven't even seen it. All right, but back to the style. There's a lot of still trademarks that we haven't talked about.
So many
with Martin Scorsese's camera work. Like I said, some films he doesn't do this stuff because it doesn't suit the film, but he's so remarkable at using, like, he throws everything but the kitchen sink at it sometimes. Like Goodfellas is an example of that. After Hours is an example of that.
Wolf of Wall Street.
Wolf of Wall Street's a perfect example of that. One of my favorite techniques that he uses is the freeze frame. The freeze frame is such a powerful image. And some filmmakers still use it to this day. He still uses it a lot. And this is just, freezing an image. Goodfellas, I think, is the greatest use of the freeze frame. There's, I think, 7 freeze frames in the first act showing Henry Hill's upbringing and his rise to, growing into a criminal from being a young kid. And an example of this is like when he's running away from the cars and they explode, and there's that explosion, and Henry Hill's like, frozen. And then
he tells the great anecdote.
Yeah, great anecdote about the kids taking his mother's groceries home. It's a beautiful freeze frame, and there's a bunch in that movie. After Hours, the opening credits starts with a freeze frame where Jerry Lewis leaves his talk show, and he's swarmed by a mob of fans, and then Rupert Pupkin's friend, she's
King of Comedy.
Yeah, King of Comedy. What did I say?
After Hours.
Sorry, King of Comedy.
Get it right, man. Do you even like Martin Scorsese?
As I'm describing the credits of a movie no one's seen. And she jumps into his limo, and he jumps out to escape her. And then she presses her hands up to the window, and there's a flash of a camera, and it freeze frames. And then the title credits roll over that freeze frame. It's an image that tells you everything you need to know about the theme of the movie, the obsession with celebrity. This woman, she's obsessed with Jerry Lewis, and her hands are just like reaching onto this pane of glass with the flash of a paparazzi and a mob behind her. It's a beautiful image, and it just perfectly translates what we're looking at and what the theme of the movie is. His use of freeze frames, he uses a lot of them in Wolf of Wall Street. It's just really remarkable. And it's important when he uses them, and it means something. And it also kind of a little bit takes you out of the film, but it helps when there's narration. And it kind of makes you realize you are watching a film in a way because the image is frozen. And it really translates so much of what the movie's about. It also, he picks the right frame, the perfect image that he stops to show you. And when he does it, he's telling you this is important. I'm showing this for a reason. I'm not just freeze framing it because it looks cool. I'm freeze framing it right here because I want you to know what we're talking about, what the story is. It's really remarkable.
But also, it looks really cool.
It does look really cool, yeah. Also, Steadicam is a camera technique that he doesn't use so often, but when he does, it's some of the best ever done. And the greatest use of this is, of course, in Goodfellas with the long take into the Copacabana. I'd say it's the greatest Steadicam shot ever done. Stanley Kubrick did so much great Steadicam work, but if you're talking about one shot, that's it. It's also a great Steadicam shot when Henry Hill goes to bash the neighbor's face in. That's a Steadicam shot as well. Also a remarkable long take. He's able to use the Steadicam in a way that feels monumental because he uses it so few times in a movie. And so when he does use it, it's just, you really feel it.
You touch her again, you're dead. You're dead. The cool thing about the Goodfellas one is that wasn't the original plan for how they're going to film that. They were going to go through the entrance of the Copacabana, but then they couldn't use the entrance because it was still being used like that night as a restaurant and club. So they actually had to figure out, and Marty came up with the idea of let's go through the back door. Well, excuse me.
You all right? It's the wine.
No, I choked for a second. Let's use the back door. We'll make a great tracking shot out of it. You know, he's a great problem solver, like high octane. We have an issue. We need to solve this problem on set. That's half of directing, is solving problems and making resolutions of huge issues that could delay the production or not. And, you know, not a lot of filmmakers make it because they can't handle the kind of pressure of a film. And, you know, Marty had problems in his personal life that leaked into his productions as well. Like New York was basically a failed production because of that was when he was starting his habit of addiction to cocaine, and it was getting out of control. And that movie, when you watch it, it kind of like at times doesn't fully make sense because the script was being improvised so much with places that didn't really fit the original script. And a lot of his movies do have improvisation, but sometimes it doesn't make sense, especially if you're not keeping track of everything the characters are saying. You're shooting out of order. And like when he tried to do, he did a lot of improvisation on Boardwalk Empire, which is different because that's a TV series. So I'm sure the writers lost their minds when they saw that on set.
But, I don't know. He can do whatever he wants.
But I mean, it changes.
He was Martin Scorsese.
Yeah, but it changes the trajectory of characters for a TV show that you've already written for multiple episodes. But yeah, you're right.
You have a show because of him.
They had to go for it. They had to go with it. I guess we're going to do this now. But I mean, the improvisation is so special in so many movies. I mean, even with Wolf of Wall Street or Goodfellas, you know, they have these great scripts that have been written by these great writers, but Scorsese's like on set, like, let's just do something else. Let's like throw the script out the window and see what we can do, see what we can come up with. Like there's so much great improvisation on Goodfellas. The Wolf of Wall Street is full of improvisation thanks to Jonah Hill being part of the cast and pioneering it, being called the king of improv on set because he brought so much of that to the movie because he's excellent at it, excellent at the comedy, but a lot of his movies have a ton of improv.
The sides did cure cancer. That was the problem. That's why they were so expensive.
$20,000 for sides? Besides? What, they cure cancer?
He was just on Howard Stern, I think a couple years ago, talking about Wolf, and he actually said...
Who, Jonah?
Yeah, so Jonah said that he's worked with a lot of great directors by now, and he said that Martin Scorsese, he was surprised by how much he was looking for the actors to improvise. And he said that the impression he got from Scorsese was that he wanted to see what they would come up with. And it would excite him to see what they were going to do. And he said that it completely shocked him because he was expecting Scorsese to be so controlled and refined and have an exact idea of what he wanted to do. But then he was shocked to see that on set, Scorsese was like, yeah, try this. Yeah, do this. And Scorsese was like having a lot of fun watching them all try new things and improvise. Because I think Scorsese understands that there's something to be said about having a great amount of control, someone like Fincher or Stanley Kubrick, but also Scorsese, I think he understands how incredible great actors are and how much they can add to it because he's not an actor. He's hiring one of the greatest actors alive, Leonardo DiCaprio, Why not let him do what he wants? Why not let him try things? That's his specialty. That's what he's an expert at. He's an expert at acting. He's an expert at performing. So let him perform. Let him try things out. And I think that Scorsese, he's open to letting things change based upon what the actors are doing. So he's not worried about sticking to the black and white script that he has. The ink is dry doesn't mean that we have to stick to that. Like, we can let things change. Jonah Hill also said this line that Scorsese told him about directing. He said that just get out of the film's way, which means let the film become the film. You have the script and you have the plan, but let the film happen and let it take its own form and take its own shape. And yeah, you have the sets, yeah, you have the wardrobe, and you have the actors there, you have the lines, but let them add to it. And Matt Damon has a great story talking about working on The Departed with them. And he said that he, Scorsese, and Jack Nicholson were in a hotel room, and they were rehearsing a scene they were going to perform. And then Jack said some stuff and improvised some stuff, and Matt Damon was really impressed by it. And then Jack Nicholson said, I wouldn't have gotten this far if I wasn't a great writer. And then Matt Damon was like, you know what, you're right, because if you're a great actor, you're rewriting things and you're coming up with new dialogue and you're coming up with a new interpretation of a scene. That is writing. It's just you're not maybe writing it on paper, you're not typing it on a typewriter or in Final Draft, but that is essentially a form of writing. And the best actors are clearly the best writers as well for acting.
There's so many great improv stories on the set of Martin Scorsese movies. Just to stay on Jack with The Departed, the most famous probably in Marty's entire career is Jack Nicholson bringing a real gun to shoot the scene with Leo where he's asking him about the rat at the little table in the bar. Real gun on set. Jack also brought the dildo to the movie theater. He brought that as well. He did a few other things on set.
Oh, also the killing scene on the beach. So another Matt Damon story. I just saw an interview where they were talking about, so when Jack kills the couple on the beach with Frenchie, and he says she fell funny. So the script just said Frank kills them. That's it. And then he said Jack talked to Marty and he was like, if you keep the camera rolling, I could say she fell funny. And if you keep the camera rolling, blah, 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 blah. And so Scorsese was just like, yeah, do what you want, Jack. And that scene, that moment completely changed because of Jack Nicholson.
And that's one of the reasons why Jack took that role. He was basically like not really doing movies
almost
anymore.
Retired.
Yeah, basically in that realm, because we obviously all know that he is pretty much retired because he has memory loss and memory issues. That's why he hasn't acted really since The Departed. He's been in a few things here and there. But that was like his last big role.
I think the last big role was the Bucket List with Morgan Freeman.
Yeah, but like no, that was the three old guys. Like
with Michael Caine and yeah.
But like like
Zach Braff made that.
I mean, like great juicy role, like Jack being Jack. Yeah. That's just a silly fun movie. But nothing against it. It's great.
Zach Braff has unsubscribed. Sorry, Zach.
He was a $5 patron. So what was I saying? So great improv. Jack did that because he did The Departed because he got complete creative freedom. He could improvise and do whatever he wanted. That's why he was part of it, because Martin gave him that kind of freedom. And other great improv stories. I mean, The King of Comedy. There's a couple entire scenes of De Niro and Jerry Lewis improvising an entire scene, or something like Goodfellas.
Joe Pesci at the Funny How. That whole thing was improvised.
Yeah, so that whole thing, he based that off of a story. So Goodfellas, when Pesci, it's Tommy and Henry at the bar, at the tiki bar.
It's one of the most memorable scenes from the film, and it was not in the script.
Yeah, Pesci directed it. He based it off of a real story that he saw while he was waiting tables around mobsters. Like, he kind of like based it on an interaction that he saw. So that's why he improvised it. Only Ray Liotta and Pesci knew what was going to happen besides Scorsese in the scene. That's why when you're watching that scene, there's so much silence. You could hear a pin drop because the entire cast, the entire crew, they're all watching, like listening, like, this isn't part of the script. This wasn't the take we just did. Let's hear it happen. What's going to happen, because there's so much great suspense that they both build, and Marty builds with silence, which he's great at doing, which we'll get into in a little bit. But other improvisation moments. Casino, there are so many great improvised conversations between Joe Pesci and De Niro in that movie as well. Like the entire conversation they have in the desert when they meet out. He's like, you'd be nobody if it wasn't out me. I get calls every week making fun of you. Like that entire conversation.
What are you doing on TV?
In the desert. That's all improvised because Martin trusts them.
Mark Wahlberg only took the role in The Departed because Scorsese said you can improvise however much you want. So a lot of what Wahlberg says in that role is not at all in the script.
What's the matter? You don't know any Shakespeare?
Who am I? I'm the guy that does his job. Who the fuck are you?
You must be the other guy. It's so great. But like another...
But I'm sorry. The Goodfellas, a defining scene is improvised. So I think by making more movies, he realized the actors can really improve the story based upon their ideas.
If they're great actors.
If they're great. Well, if you hire a great actor, then the job's done.
Yeah, I mean, De Niro and Pesci, two of the GOATs, you're going to be good. But I think just to stay on more things that are present in a lot of Scorsese's movies.
Oh, I got a lot of style trademarks.
I think one that people don't really think of when they watch his movies is his use of silence. He uses silence so effectively in the right moments that it really just enhances the moment, enhances the mood. Like that scene with Henry and Tommy, that entire moment is Tommy like berating Henry and just busting his balls. But then there's a great moment where the climactic moment is filled with silence. There's no noise.
Yeah.
And then Henry's like, get the fuck off, Tommy. Like, this
Shut
is crazy.
the fuck up.
But
Get the fuck out of here.
The climax, the greatest moment of suspense is dead silent. And Scorsese does this in so many of his movies.
So I'm going to build off that because I'm glad you brought it up.
I got some brick and some mortar. Let's go.
Not just silence, but sound effects as well. Raging Bull, it could be the greatest sound mixing in film history. And it's the boxing matches. What Scorsese and his sound mixers and sound producers did was unbelievable. Like the sound effects they used during the boxing matches, like they used elephant squeals for some of the boxing matches. Like you'll just hear an elephant go like as he's throwing a punch, or you'll hear the beating of a drum, like drum beats, all sorts of crazy sound effects. But then he'll just suck the sound out, like when when Jake LaMotta is getting destroyed by Sugar Ray.
You're right, yeah.
And then Sugar Ray, we do the great dolly zoom, but when the dolly zoom is happening, he sucks out all the sound and it just goes completely silent. And then Sugar Ray is just standing there, and he's just like prologuing this final blow. And then he raises his fist and it goes down, and then all of a sudden the sound comes back and it just explodes. Unrelenting, just haymaker, haymaker. But the sound effects, it's not like just punches. It's like crazy sounds being used in that sequence and other scenes as well. But the sound design in that film is unbelievable. And silence, again, is another example of the theme of silence is used throughout the entire movie. And there's got to be like maybe 5 or 6 intense moments where the sound is just muted. You don't hear anything.
Yeah, he uses that in his entire filmography to great effect. And just to stay and build more off Raging Bull sound design, the boxing ring, it's so chaotic. It's so loud. And like you said, all these great sound effects. They actually burned the sound. They destroyed it after they made the movie because they didn't want anyone to steal the sound design they created because it's so unique and interesting. But like when he's in the boxing ring, there's actually only like 6 minutes of boxing in that movie, which took 10 weeks to film those sequences alone. Compared to the rest of the film, it only makes up 6 minutes, but it's so loud and bombastic. But it also matches many moments in the film outside of the boxing ring with the same noises you're hearing, like when he's taking out he's abusing his brother, he's abusing his wife. You hear the same sound effects. You hear the city. You hear so many loud crashing noises which match and mirror the sounds that you're hearing inside the ring. It's really brilliant sound design and more great uses of silence in his films. The Departed, one of my favorite uses of silence in film history, is when Costigan answers his phone because Sullivan called him. And it's just cutting back and forth to each other, and then the hang up.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. Yeah. It's so well done. But when you watch Infernal Affairs, which Martin Scorsese, he found out that this movie was going to be a remake. He did not watch Infernal Affairs. He never checked out because he didn't want to make the similar themes. When you watch that scene in Infernal Affairs, most filmmakers like that filmmaker, there's a bunch of music and tension, like strings, like building so much tension. But Marty does
yeah.
Dead Silence.
I've watched Infernal Affairs, and I'm not just saying it because I love Scorsese, but he improved on it. I think it could be the greatest remake of a film ever because he just improved on it in every way. And it's a very good movie, but that's a great example of they just use just like traditional filmmaking techniques, and he just elevates it with his ideas and his creativity. Another great use of silence is when he cuts off music. You'll hear the Dropkick Murphys playing on full blast, then cut, it's not playing anymore. That happens a lot in his films where he'll be playing a song. And also, do you want to get into the music?
Yeah, let's
get
go.
into music.
Let's go, man.
So first, before we get into like his brilliant music selections, but the way he uses music. So like an example, like he'll cut music off, and that like really jolts the audience awake. Like, you'll just be hearing something full blast, and you'll just stop, and you're like, oh, whoa.
Tarantino does that too.
Yeah, but also what Scorsese does is he'll turn the volume up and down on music. So if traditionally in 99.9% of movies, when you hear the music playing, it's going to stay at the same volume. Either it'll be like practical music where it's like maybe people are in a club or in a bar and you hear the music laced over the scene, or the filmmakers chose a track to play over the scene. You'll hear the music and it'll stay the same volume. But what Scorsese does, he'll turn that volume up. He'll start the scene off with the music playing lightly, and then he'll just jack the volume up all the way. And then now the music is blaring. No other filmmaker I can think does that.
It's like the cocaine sequences in Goodfellas.
Yeah, exactly. And it's in The Departed. It's in so many of his movies. And it's not just like he's slowly raising the volume and just slowly building it. It'll be like someone with a knob just turn it up to 10, from 2 to 10 on a dime. And it's just like, it's amazing. No one else really does that. Mean Streets, it's a great example. There's a fight in the pool hall where the rival friend groups just like start talking shit to each other, and then De Niro starts the fight, and then they all start brawling. Well, there's just a great Motown song playing, but it's playing very very low volume for the first 2 minutes of the scene, and it almost feels like, oh, is this like playing in the bar? And then once the fight breaks out, he just jacks the volume up like on a dime out of nowhere, throws the volume all the way up, and now it's just like the song's playing, and then you hear the sound effects of the fight. No other filmmaker does that.
And he's the master at selecting film for movies.
Music
for films. Did I say music? Films
You said
for
film
movies.
for movies.
He's the master at selecting music and soundtracks for his movies. And, there are other filmmakers that are comparable. I mean, Tarantino's up there as well. And
Pulp Fiction's goated for sure.
There are a lot
It's
of
up there.
filmmakers. I mean, you can even say that James Gunn does a great job selecting music for his movies as well. But I think like Marty's the absolute master at it. And this guy, I watched a great interview with him recently where he's talking about how he's always storing like songs in his mind that he's always waiting to use in the movie. Like he'll listen to a song, or he knows a song, he's just waiting for the right opportunity to use it. And before the digital age, he had tapes and tapes full of dozens and dozens of songs that there are songs for ideas that he would use for a movie in the future. Like I have 300 songs in this library on tapes that at some point they're songs I want to use. I don't know when I'm going to use it. I'm going to find the right moment at some point, but they're there. They're stored. He's probably got so many like that, but it's really interesting that he saves it, and he knows exactly, like, while he's working on a script or reading a script, he can think of the song he wants to use. Like when he was adapting the Wise Guys, the book, into Goodfellas with the writer Pileggi, right? Pileggi, I think.
Yeah,
Nicholas Pileggi?
Pileggi, yeah.
Something like that.
That is right, yeah.
He's working on the screenplay with Pileggi, and I saw an interview where Pileggi's like, we're at the scene where De Niro is just looking at Maury with the cigarette in his mouth at the bar, and Marty yells at me, he's like, write down, add cream. Just add cream. And Pileggi's like, what do you mean add cream? He's just like, just write down add cream, because the song, he's going to put it right
solo.
there. Dun, 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 bow, bow, bow. Because Marty's
Sunshine of Your Love.
And he's reading the script, and he's writing scripts. He doesn't write all of his scripts, but like some of the Goodfellas, he's hearing the movie as he's working it out at the same time. And Marty, not only is he great at selecting music, he's great at working the movie, the edits to the songs he's using. So he actually edits to the music as well. That's why it's edited so well, because he's a great filmmaker in terms of he shoots as an editor in his mind. it makes his editor's job a little easier. He's very involved in the editing process in a lot of his movies, but he shoots like an editor to make the job easier, and he uses the music to edit too as well.
And I mean, it's astounding because editing back then was so time consuming and so difficult. Actually cutting and splicing film, people don't really realize how much went into that.
Thelma Shoemaker is a hero.
She's the best editor
incredible.
of all. She's the greatest editor in film history. She is.
And she loves Scorsese so much because he always had her in mind when he's filming movies. And it's a mistake that he learned from when he was making those early films, those exploitation films, that he became a great editing filmmaker while he's shooting the movie. Like if you watch a movie like Goodfellas or Casino, a lot of the shots, they're designed for easier editing, or he has the edits already in his mind of what he wants it to look like when he's cutting from shots.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I believe he's the greatest selector of music in history. You know, using pop music from popular culture wasn't really that common in the 60s. And John Cassavetes started doing it in his films. Some French filmmakers started using it in new wave movies. It was still very much a new thing. And with Mean Streets, it was really a game changer. He used a lot of great tracks in that. He used...
he got 3 like popular songs.
He got a Rolling Stones song, Jumping Jack. What's it called?
Jumping Jack.
Jumping Jack Flash. It's played in the bar scene, the red bar scene. And also, I mean, Rolling Stones are a constant throughout his career. He used "Give Me Shelter" in 3 movies. 3 movies he used "Give Me Shelter."
Yeah, you give me. Oh yeah, "Give Me Shelter." Yeah, Departed.
Yeah,
and
Casino
Goodfellas.
and Goodfellas. Yeah. But what's really the most impressive thing is Goodfellas, because there are great movies with great music. Like I think Pulp Fiction is really up there. But when you look at Goodfellas, the sheer number of songs that he chose for the film, it's unbelievable. I think it might be the most songs ever put in a movie. It could be. It's up there. It's like 50 tracks, maybe more. And even though there are so many tracks used in the movie, they all work. They all work really well. And Pulp Fiction's amazing. And Reservoir Dogs has some great tracks as well. Edgar Wright movies has some great tracks. But there's something about the Goodfellas musical soundtrack that when you hear the songs play in the scenes, they seem like when you hear the music, it's like it's the only way the scene could ever work.
That's how I learned a lot of that music. Like 60s, 70s music.
It's a great soundtrack.
The Goodfellas soundtrack and going through Martin Scorsese movies.
Yeah, when you hear Rags to Riches or when you hear The Crystals and Then He Kissed Me during the long take, Cream with De Niro, it's really Layla with the piano outro showing the montage of the dead gangsters. It's really, and those are just a couple, but like the film
Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
We also have Jack Jones, Tony Bennett's in that movie multiple times. I mean, Rags to Riches is one of my favorite placements of music of all time. And Dean Martin, also, who is it? The Raisinets. They do the music song. The Ronettes.
Yeah, Ronettes.
Like the great Christmas music as well. The Stones have multiple songs. Cream. George Harrison has a song in there. The Sex Pistols. It's crazy how much music is in that movie. It's over 2 hours of like the tracks, but I don't know how much it fills up in the movie, but it's nuts. It's like got to be 25, 30 tracks.
Maybe
Easy.
more, man.
Easy.
Maybe
I'm looking at it
more.
right now. It might be like 35.
It's unbelievable. And they all are just like perfect in every scene. And just like the more chaotic rock stuff during the cocaine sequences, it's really remarkable. And I think my favorite instance of music in a film has got to be the reveal of the adult Henry. And
Rags to Riches?
Yeah, Rags to Riches. And it's just like that brass comes in when we see the fully formed adult Henry Hill. Dun, 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 dun. And it's just like, oh my God. It's just perfect. And also, I mean, And Then He Kissed Me playing during the long take at the Copacabana. Oh my God, it's just amazing. And you have the great what do you call that instrument with the belt, like that
Cymbal?
No,
yeah, I know
you know what I'm talking
the
about.
percussion instrument.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't remember.
Thing.
Yeah, we're not, but you know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. I made a list of my favorite uses of tracks in his movies.
Oh, let's hear it.
So, And Then He Kissed Me by the Crystals from Goodfellas, the long take at the Copacabana. It's just perfect. And then Sunshine of Your Love, Cream by Cream, also from Goodfellas. This is the slow motion push-in of Jimmy Conway staring down at Maury,
Coolest shot in the movie.
deciding to kill Maury. Like, he's breaking my balls.
Busting
He's
my
breaking
balls.
my balls. Yeah, I never met a ball breaker like you, Maury. But like the dun 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 dun.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And it's so friggin' cool. Rags to Riches also in Goodfellas. Goodfellas is the masterpiece of soundtracks, I think. Gimme Shelter in The Departed.
Great.
Especially. It really sets the tone. It's after we get the introduction to Matt Damon's Colin character when he was a little kid. And we meet Frank for the first time. And then we hear the Gimme Shelter guitar riff, that great guitar riff by Keith Richards starts playing. It's just really terrific. Sets the tone. Then also Dropkick Murphy's Needle Drop after both characters get their introduction, and then we get the montage of Costigan going through prison and stuff. But Dropkick Murphy's just like
That's a great use of authenticity to The Departed because Dropkick Murphys were huge in Massachusetts. They're a Boston-based
That
band.
was the #1 song for like 2 years.
And so especially because The Departed, people freaked out. Like in Massachusetts, we all lost our minds when we heard the Dropkick Murphys in The Departed. We were like, oh my God, it's the Dropkick Murphys.
Yeah,
so
exactly,
cool.
'cause
You saw that like Fenway or like in Boston. Like they played all the clubs in Boston. So everyone knew who the Dropkick Murphys were, but then it's so accurate.
It fit the culture. That
authenticity.
We should have an authenticity drinking game.
Continue your list.
And then we have Jumping Jack Flash in Mean Streets by the Rolling Stones.
Only brought it up 4 times.
It's a great song. Then Layla, but the piano exit of Layla. Dun, dun,
Yeah.
dun, 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 dun,
Yeah, when all the dead bodies.
I just want them to know.
Yeah, the dead bodies.
Yeah, so during that montage, that's by Derek and the Dominoes.
That's a lot of people say that's Scorsese's best use of music.
It's remarkable.
Yeah.
It's great, and that's actually a really long song. That's the outro of the song.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the first time I heard the whole song, I was like, "Oh, this is a good song." And then I heard the outro. I was like, "Oh, it's from Goodfellas." I didn't even realize it's
First half is different.
Completely different thing. And then we have Smokestack Lightning by Howlin' Wolf from The Wolf of Wall Street. This is the great bluesy guitar that's playing while Jordan's narrating the opening of the sequence of the movie. We're getting informed of his world, who he is,
drinking the orange juice, walking outside,
driving his Ferrari. Oh
no, wait, my Ferrari was
red.
White. No, it was white.
It was white,
like Don Johnson.
And showing his estate and just that opening narration of who Jordan Belfort is. Smokestack Lightning is playing for that. I love that song.
Wolf of Wall Street has a great album.
Unbelievable soundtrack. And then Werewolves of London in The Color of Money. This is when Tom Cruise's character Vincent is just going ham on the local pro, and he's just like, this is the song that goes dun 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 dun. His hair was perfect. And Tom Cruise just annihilates that scene with charisma and cool and arrogance.
Tommy C.
Misguided arrogance.
Our guy.
Amazing use of music in a film, but it just suits the scene. It suits the character and the tone of the movie so perfectly. It's really an underrated moment in Scorsese movies. Then we have House of the Rising Sun. Everyone knows this song, House of the Rising Sun.
Bob Dylan. But the Bob Dylan version, right?
No, this is a different version. This song plays when in the third act when a lot of the mobsters are getting arrested.
Oh, Goodfellas.
Montage style. No, it's Casino.
Oh, okay,
This is Casino. And then we have Dust My Blues by Elmore James and The Wolf of Wall Street. Another great blues track. I love the use of blues music in that movie. It really suited the tone. And this is like this freewheeling nature and this just like no care attitude that they approach with that film. Then Please Mr. Postman by the Marvelettes. This played in Mean Streets. I actually brought it up, the bar fight in the pool room. This is the song. It's a Motown song by a trio of female singers, and it just sounds perfect with this brawl going on in this pool room. It's just marvelous. Then we have Cavalleria Rusticana, the Intermezzo, which is by Pietro Mascagni. This is the opening music for Raging Bull. The opening title credits while Jake LaMotta is wide shot in the boxing ring, air boxing with his robe on. Really beautiful song, stunning strings, and it feels like the mood of the film is setting the stage for what's to come.
I have a couple other favorites just off the top of my head. So I think you're missing a huge one. I think you're missing the Ronettes for Be My Baby at the opening of Mean Streets. Be my baby. Be my
Great pick.
opening of Mean Streets, phenomenal. And the Ronettes also do the Christmas music in Goodfellas, like
yeah.
Frosty the Snowman.
Love it.
So good in the Christmas scenes in Goodfellas, which is kind of a Christmas music, a Christmas movie, but it's an epic.
Didn't I tell you not to get anything big?
But take it back now. But one of my all-time favorites use of Scorsese's music in his movies that I think not a lot of people talk about is Mrs. Robinson in The Wolf of Wall Street when the FBI is raiding the agency. They're coming in and it's placed so well to the moment in the scene because it starts off slow with the percussion, dun 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 dun, dun dun dun. And they're walking in, and then they're like, "Oh, we have the warrants," and they start arresting everybody, and everyone starts going crazy. Then the movie gets into the song gets into the chorus, it goes so well with the scenes because Scorsese picks perfect music for perfect moments in this film and edits to them specifically.
Also, in Wolf of Wall Street, when the boat sinks and they're rescued, there's this great 80s synthy song, Gloria.
And the girls are dancing.
And then Jordan's just looking out in the distance, and his plane, his private jet, actually blows up in the midair on its way to find them. And it's just like this up-tempo, fun dancing 80s song is playing while they're getting rescued from a ship disaster. It's just brilliant. He also had the Foo Fighters song, There Goes My Hero, right?
In Wolf of Wall Street?
In Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah, I think so.
Unbelievable.
I like the Monkey Man in Goodfellas. That's the song I think that's playing when Henry's like looking into the sky for the
helicopter scene.
Yeah, I think that's
the
Monkey
cocaine
Man.
sequence.
Yeah. But there's so many great examples in almost all of his movies. But then you show how diverse his filmography is. Then you watch a movie like Silence.
Yeah,
there's nothing like that. And also great composers that have worked with him. Bernard Herrmann made his last great piece of work. Bernard Herrmann before he passed away with Taxi Driver.
Oh, the saxophone music is unbelievable. It's one of the greatest scores ever made.
But even not just the sax, but the great music he came up with. Even just the opening, like the sound of like an engine that he created with instruments and everything like that.
The harp.
He did a phenomenal job. He passed away, I think, like 3 months after the movie came out, or even earlier. So that was like the last great piece of work that Bernard Herrmann did.
But speaking of Bernard Herrmann, he actually did the music for the original Cape Fear, and so when Scorsese remade Cape Fear, he used the same themes.
So good.
But when Scorsese does use a composer, he generally chooses Howard Shore for his films.
Yeah, Departed. Howard Shore's music for The Departed is phenomenal. Yeah. It's really, really great. Mostly acoustic guitar with some electric in there, but it's really phenomenal.
Yeah, so Howard Shore, I think he's been his primary composer when he needs music. Like he did Gangs of New York. And a few of his other films that don't.
Who did Shutter Island?
He just used classical music.
Oh yeah, but the guitarist, I can't remember what guitarist it was. But he selected the music for the movie.
That's an example of soundtrack selected music, but it's all classical. Basically, the entire film is classical music. But I think that he is the greatest.
Robbie Robertson selected the music for Shutter Island.
He's the greatest filmmaker to ever use music in film history, and he really, Cassavetes and a few other independent filmmakers began it, but Scorsese, he absolutely paved the way. And your favorite filmmakers who use awesome soundtracks, their movies would not be like that if it wasn't for Martin Scorsese and what he did with his movies.
Marty's like your favorite filmmaker's favorite filmmaker.
That's the thing. He is.
There's a reason why when Bong Joon-ho won his Best Director at the Academy Awards, who did he bring up? He brought up Martin Scorsese in his Oscar-winning speech. He said thank you to Martin Scorsese for basically his work and his movies.
Also, that same year when Sam Mendes won the Globe for 1917, he said all of us filmmakers are just following in the footsteps of Martin Scorsese.
And it's crazy because no film institutions really gave Scorsese credit, like I said, for so many years. This guy was making movies for 4 decades before he won an Academy Award. and he's only won one.
And he wasn't just making movies. He was making some of the greatest films to ever be made.
And yes, he had bad luck. A lot of times, like the Oscars, it's bad luck sometimes with other movies that have come out. Some are more like culturally relevant or more popular or more movies that the Academy would want to give an award to versus somebody like Martin Scorsese, who was a very provocative filmmaker for a very long time.
Always pushing the boundaries.
A lot of studios didn't want to give him budgets ever because not only was he making provocative films, he was making pretty unsuccessful movies for half his filmography for a while.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. Another trademark I want to talk about is his insert shots. So probably the most famous user of insert shots right now is Wes Anderson. His inserts are remarkable and so fun, entertaining, and creative. Other filmmakers as well, but Scorsese really is. He could be the greatest user of insert shots. And I mean, even in Wolf of Wall Street, there's so many insert shots. And when I say an insert
like
shot,
close up of something.
A close up of an object, of someone grabbing something, it could be a note, it could be an object.
The Ring and the Fellowship of the Ring.
Exactly. Insert shots. And then they just cut them in. He's been doing it heavily all of his career. And Thelma Shoemaker has always been such a great editor of cutting in the insert shots in remarkable ways. And he'll use like multiple insert shots and she'll edit it quickly to kind of portray the sense of anxiety, of fear, of energy. There's a lot of great, I mean, who has ever filmed drug use better than Martin Scorsese?
Maybe Aronofsky in Requiem for a Dream. It's pretty It's pretty close to like how well he did it.
Yeah, it's similar.
But I like Goodfellas' approach better.
I mean,
it's different, but they're different approaches.
But the shots are so creative. Like Aronofsky, he'll get like close-ups and stuff. But Scorsese, he loves doing POVs, and he does the POV of like the money roll literally snorting up cocaine. It's like a POV shot. And it's like, how does he do that? And also, Color of Money, the pool sequences. The insert shots are remarkable.
So good.
There's so many shots that he manages to make two people playing pool look as visually interesting as the most extravagant action sequence you could ever watch.
It's comparable to Fincher making everyday use of objects look really interesting.
Investigation.
Like The Social Network, where we're typing on computers for a lot of that movie, but Fincher makes it look interesting.
Yeah. But Scorsese is he's 10 times
Scorsese.
It's so creative. And so remarkable, and so many. But also, it goes into the editing as well. And Tarantino's really known for his insert shots. He has great insert shots in Django and Inglourious Bastards. Wait for the cream,
the cream,
the cream.
Edgar Wright, great.
Edgar Wright,
he's
great.
Built his entire editing style.
But this all stems from Scorsese. In his insert shots are just so remarkable and so simple. But they work, and it really works because him and Shoemaker had such a great kinship and such a great wavelength connection where she seems to know what he wants, and that's probably why they kept working together because she cut his films and scenes in the way he was imagining it in his head. But he doesn't always do the insert shots, but he does it when it needs to be done, and he does it effortlessly. And sometimes he edits it to be chaotic, and it really works. And then and to the editing, his editing is remarkable. In The Departed, there's a certain sequence that's a great example of this, of using all the facets of editing and cinematography. When Costigan is following Colin after the porno theater, and he was there hiding in the back, and then when Colin leaves, he goes and follows him. They walk through crowds of people, and he follows him through streets and alleys. The way Scorsese films it, it's very chaotic, and he changes the shutter, he changes the frame rate, but also the editing is chaotic, and we're getting shots all over the place. But we never feel disorientated. We feel like we're trying to follow someone we can't grasp, which is what the position Costigan's in.
We got the smoke behind.
Yeah, smoke. But in the aperture, the frame rate will change, and then we get the reflections and mirrors, and it's just an amazing use of editing and cinematography in such a beautiful way to portray this sense of chaotic following of someone, of barely catching a glimpse of them, rather than it just being a boring two-shot of following them. and then following him.
And then we cut to the security camera, which is the shot, and then we're watching the security camera footage.
But then, so the editing and the cinematography is so chaotic and so energetic, and then it cuts to the phone rings, and they both hide behind a corner, and then Colin he's behind this corner, and he's nervous as he hears footsteps approaching. The editing stops, and then we just get this slow push in on Colin, and we're feeling the tension of the moment. We went from this chaotic energy all the way to this long take, slow pushing of the character, all in the same sequence. And then a man walks out, and then he stabs him, in thinking it was the guy after him, but it was really just some guy passing by. It's just a perfect use of incredible cinematography and pitch perfect editing by Shoemaker. And that's what filmmaking is. It's just the creativity he had. And he turned on paper what seems to be a really simple scene, honestly kind of boring, and 99% of filmmakers would shoot it the same way. But he films it in such a way that only he can do, and it really elevates the film into new heights and elevates this really simple thing into really something special.
Yeah, the insert shots are phenomenal, and Marty's always worked with really talented cinematographers. So for The Departed, he was working with Michael Ballhaus. That was the last movie they worked on together. I believe that's the last movie he ever shot. It's like his swan song. Really tremendous looking film as well. And he did a bunch of movies with him. He also used to work with Robert Richardson in the early 2000s and 90s.
That's Tarantino's cinematographer.
He did Casino, The Aviator, movies like that. Right now, he's been working mostly with Rodrigo Prieto,
the Spanish cinematographer.
He did Wolf of Wall Street, Silence, stuff like that. So he's worked with tremendous talent for cinematographers. But it's interesting that he still gets similar things out of them for what he likes to use for his style. And, you know, a lot of filmmakers, they're able to adapt not only to the story and the changing of technology with film, but also with different cinematographers. I think Christopher Nolan's a great example of that as well, working with Wally Pfister for so many years, then switching to Hoyt van Hoytema since Interstellar, and it's just taken his style and his approach to filmmaking to a new height, which is really terrific. And I think that...
Well, I wouldn't say so much that. These movies still feel and look the same. I think it's the use of extensive use of IMAX film.
The format.
Yeah.
And the
but
technology.
it still feels like...
It's a Nolan movie.
Yeah.
But I think that it's just changed.
Because Wally's great.
Yeah,
Wally Pfister is great.
He's got an Oscar.
Yeah.
He's
and Dark Knight Rises is gorgeous.
Inception's incredible.
Amazing.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything against Wally.
But I would say that Nolan films, it's still like, if you told me Wally Pfister shot Interstellar, I'd be like, oh, I could believe that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But Scorsese, his movies, they look different. And also that goes back to the lack of like a cohesive style from one film to the next.
I think The Aviator would be the biggest example of that, where he's using different types of film and film stock to
color
shoot different sequences of the movie, you know, different uses of Technicolor 2.0, whatever the film stock was called, wherever they're using for coloring. That's why, like, some of that movie looks odd, like the sequences where he's with Katharine Hepburn, or he's in there in the golfing and the grass looks blue, or the peas on the plate look blue. It's because they use different
Great insert shot.
And then
that's my favorite insert shot.
Then Howard looks
Howard Hughes looks down at the fish, and he's just it makes you want to throw up. It makes you want to throw up.
Yeah.
With the open Branzino.
Because someone else touched his plate with their fork because of the OCD. But it looks blue. The peas look blue. The grass looks blue. Because for every era that movie takes place, Scorsese, and that was a movie that Robert Richardson shot, they used different types of film or different stages of film from those pasts to make it look like and feel like we were in that era.
Yeah, he was like, with every decade that Howard Hughes aged, he used that decade's style of film.
Different hues and saturations of color. It's really interesting, but that's a reason why Scorsese is the greatest chameleon of filmmaking of all time, because he adapts to stuff like that. Like, who else would do that with a movie like The Aviator?
Because it's such a great thing to say, and it makes total sense, because like we said earlier, a Wes Anderson looks like a Wes Anderson movie. A David Fincher movie looks like a David Fincher movie. Chris Nolan film looks like a Chris Nolan film. They have their style and the way they like to film. You know, David Fincher loves using yellows and blues. He loves using a very controlled camera, almost like too controlled. He also loves to do tracking shots from a low angle, tracking with the actors. That's something you see all the time in his movies.
Don't forget the serial killers.
But also he likes to use camera pans. Like, the camera will pan a lot. especially almost like 360.
Mank might be his most unique movie because it's black and white.
Yeah, exactly. Still a lot of the same trademarks though. And Nolan, for many years he shot just anamorphic lenses, and even he still uses like the same kind of film stock, color grade film stock that he likes to use.
But Nolan's more of like the use of time, the concept of time and puzzles.
But I'm talking about actual physical filmaking.
Yeah.
But he likes to do his following shots. He likes
the
to go
silhouette following from behind.
Yeah, he likes to do handheld a lot when you wouldn't expect it. He doesn't really use insert shots at all, really. He likes to do a lot of wide shots.
Huge sets.
He likes to do Steadicam work a lot. You can point out his trademarks and how he likes to film. He loves handheld a lot. Chris Nolan, you'd be surprised how much handheld work is in his film.
Half of Interstellar is just on top of Hoyt's shoulders.
Yeah, exactly. And in Dunkirk, like the opening chase sequence of the kids running, it's all handheld. It's so shaky, but it makes you feel like the chaos of the moment. It's great. I saw this interview with Wally Pfister talking about Inception, and he said, Wally Pfister said up until like 2 weeks before filming, he said Chris Nolan was still indecisive about, should I do this all handheld or am I going to do this all on tripods and Steadicams? Or he said he wasn't even sure what he was going to do. He said he almost filmed the whole thing handheld of Inception handheld. So that's how much he likes handheld. But then you look at Scorsese, and like we've said before, we're talking about trademarks of his, but they are not present in all of his movies. And actually, quite the opposite. They're present in only maybe half of his movies. Like, he's not using the red light in most of his movies, but it still is a constant thing in many of his movies. And the music, even though we're saying he uses music so well, there are so many movies where he doesn't use soundtracks. And I want to talk about the style of his is the pans and tilts.
The quick pans.
Quick pans. He'll use the quick pans to edit shots.
Casino's a great example.
Casino is a great example. Goodfellas is a great example of whipping the camera, and then it whips to another person. This is another Wes Anderson thing that Wes Anderson has really taken on and put into his own style. And also, but not just the pan, but the tilt. It'll be the same thing. It'll be a character tilt down into what they're holding or what they're looking at all the time. After Hours is another great example of lots of pans, lots of tilts. But there are plenty of movies where he doesn't do it. And so I like the chameleon director thing you're talking about, where he has his trademarks, but he's not like any other filmmaker. Like Stanley Kubrick, center line, everything's super wide. He goes in close-ups when he needs to.
Very controlled filmmaker.
Extremely controlled. Everything is lit. There's no blacks or dark midtones anywhere. Everything is lit. Everything is exposed. Lots of Steadicam work in his mid-early days, and then lots of just controlled cinematography. Oh no, I'm sorry. A shit ton of Steadicam work in his later days. I mixed that up. It's basically all Steadicam work after.
I'm like, The Shining is like. Have you seen it?
Eyes Wide Shut. So much Steadicam.
Have you seen it?
So much Steadicam.
Tom's walking in half that movie.
But it's all the same stuff, the same techniques. But Scorsese, he's like, whatever I want to do, I'll do. And if I don't want to do it, I'm not going to. He just doesn't have, like, he has his trademarks, but he's not defined by his trademarks like all the other great auteurs are.
Yeah, I mean, the tracking shots, he's the king of tracking shots, really is. You know, the tracking shot behind them in Goodfellas going to the back of the Coca Cabana.
Tracking shot, I would say, is PTA's forte from the side.
So a tracking shot on a rail?
Will be on a dolly tracking someone.
On a rail,
yeah.
So going side to side.
Yeah.
All right, so just, I guess the following shot. Steadicam. Goodfellas is phenomenal. That's one of the most well-known of all time, probably. But then Hugo has a tremendous one. Hugo's is phenomenal when
amazing.
Following Asa Butterfield's character into his world. It's so elaborate. It's one take. It's elaborate as hell. We have all these gears, tinkering things.
His little home.
We see so much.
By the way, if you haven't seen Hugo,
so good.
You have to watch.
So damn good.
It's really, I think it's one of the greatest children's movies ever made.
It's so underrated.
Remarkable.
I feel like no one's seen it.
Remarkable
when
movie.
people who love Scorsese, because it's a
It's
kids
so good.
movie.
Yeah.
But like his daughter introduced him to it, and like, yeah, sure.
He made it for his daughter.
Yeah,
I think.
she's like, can you make this movie? I think you'd really like it. He's like, yeah, sure.
Yeah,
After
it's
10
based,
minutes.
Yeah, it's based on the kid's book.
So it's a really
remarkable.
tremendous film. A great cast as well. I mean, Chloe Grace Moretz, Aston Butterfield, Sacha Baron Cohen. We have
Emily Mortimer.
Max von Sydow's in that as well. Helen McCroy.
Jude Law.
The cast is stacked. Absolutely stacked because it's Martin Scorsese. Everyone wants to work with him. But the following shots, they're not in every movie. Even if you look at a movie like Silence, really controlled film, a lot of natural. So you look at a movie like Silence, very controlled filmmaking, great insert shots. Like I think some of the most powerful shots of his career when the priests are stepping on the little tablets of Jesus. Really emotional.
That's great.
Very powerful shots that have so much to do with the characters. Very controlled film. Some of the most landscape shots and controlled cinematography he's ever gotten in his entire career.
It's like the most patient filmmaking.
Yeah, Silence, that's the name of the movie. And then silent filmmaking, patient filmmaking. It's a long movie, but it's a very unique film to his career. It almost feels like The Thin Red Line or something like that. Some great landscape cinematography of this beautiful country of Japan. And it has none of really the trademarks you see in a Martin Scorsese movie. You don't really get the voiceovers. You don't get the quick pans. You don't get the soundtrack. You do have some creative filmmaking and some interesting shots, some like quick push-ins and stuff like that, and some moving dolly shots and crane shots of like when Andrew Garfield's character is holding the bread up. Interesting camera shot movement there. But
I will say there is narration. Garfield narrates the first act.
Okay, so yeah, but not as much voiceover. Okay, so we'll get the voiceover, but
Yeah.
in terms of that, it doesn't always completely feel like all the trademarks of a Martin Scorsese movie.
Exactly.
Because it's very different.
So he made that movie. I believe my guess is that because he loved Akira Kurosawa, the great Japanese filmmaker. I think that he really used him as inspiration for his direction in that film because it definitely feels like an outlier in his filmography, but also it feels a lot like Last Temptation of Christ. And so,
yeah. And surprising that he made it because of what happened to him with Last Temptation of Christ.
Yeah. Because, well, they're both very different movies about religion. Last Temptation of Christ is obviously about Jesus Christ, the crucifixion, and that whole story.
That thing.
But then Silence is about it's really stunning achievement of portraying the crisis of faith. And I'm not even a religious person, but when I watched that movie, it's just the magnitude of what he did is just remarkable. And the whole movie is about the crisis of faith. And if you have faith in something, and when it's really put to the test, can you stick to your faith and can you really live and die by what you believe in?
And can you be forgiven for losing your faith?
Yeah, exactly. Can you be forgiven for preserving your own life in favor of that? And there's so many powerful resonant themes in that film. It's a really difficult film. And Silence is really just a remarkable work, and you can see the influence that Akira Kurosawa in Japanese film had on him when he was making that. And I think that's why it feels so different from anything he's ever done before.
But also feels the same. I mean, that authenticity of what these Japanese villages look like, the wardrobe, just the makeup that the woman wore around towns, it's all there. What he brings from his research, from scouring films from that culture and books, and he brings it into it, and it's just as relevant to the culture of wherever he's filming it in. He doesn't film many movies outside of the country, and that might be the only one outside of the United States. In terms of the story taking place solely outside of America.
Yeah, that's
but he
it.
brought every element to his filmmaking in terms of showing respect to the culture. And
Last Temptation of Christ.
Okay, Last Temptation of Christ, that they were going to film in Israel, but they filmed, I can't remember, Morocco they filmed in because it was cheaper.
Morocco actually doubles for a lot of desert landscapes.
Yeah, I mean, they filmed parts of Dune there. Dune reference for the episode.
Yeah, it was coming.
And
Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise.
Oh, I already referenced
You
Tom
already got
Cruise.
him.
Yeah.
But he brings that authenticity to the culture there. It's relevant term.
You couldn't stop saying authenticity.
It's the key word this episode.
It's too many times.
Give me a synonym for authenticity that you want me to use instead. Authentic, realistic, relatable.
Relatability, truth.
You know what? Authentic is a great word for it. But just watching the characters go through the villages and the towns there just seems so real.
Costume was great in that movie too. It's really remarkable.
So he brings all the elements to his films to a movie that I shot somewhere else. But I mean, just to stay on Silence and Last Temptation of Christ, his most spiritual films outside of probably Mean Streets as well. It's interesting that he, Silence was a passion project he'd been wanting to make for a long time. He's also sued because he made The Wolf of Wall Street before Silence because they were in the middle of casting Silence. Benicio del Toro was attached to it. Liam Neeson was attached to it, even though he was still played that character in the movie when they made it in 2016. But also Gael Garcia Bernal was also attached to be in the movie as well. They were all in negotiations. The production studio that was going to make it with Scorsese sued him because he decided to make Wolf of Wall Street instead at the time. And then they worked out a compromise where I'm sure Marty paid some sort of money, but also guaranteed them that Silence would be his next movie because it's something he wanted to make for decades, but the money doesn't always work out and the timing doesn't always work out. And Wolf of Wall Street was working out, even though that hadn't been in development. Like, Leo bought the rights to Wolf of Wall Street years before it was made, and they just finally got the opportunity to make it. Like, they made Shutter Island before Wolf of Wall Street, even though Leo bought the rights to Wolf of Wall Street before they made Shutter Island. But Shutter Island, the timing worked out better. And then Wolf of Wall Street, the timing worked better. And then Silence, the timing finally worked out.
From what I read, they couldn't get the full funding they wanted for Silence, so that's why they moved on to Wolf.
The thing with Marty is not a lot of studios wanted to give him money for his movies, especially with The Irishman. No one wanted to give him money for The Irishman.
That's why he went to Netflix.
Netflix was like, yo, we'll give you $160 million.
What?
$160
We're going to
million.
get a Scorsese movie? Bro, how much do you need, bro?
Silence is an incredible film, though, and I think people, I feel like a lot of people haven't seen it, and if
Nobody's seen it.
They should check it out. I mean, it made like $25 million at the box office, but that's not a lot of money, especially today. I think you should watch it if you haven't seen it yet. It's really incredible. It's a long watch, but it's beautiful. Gorgeous filmmaking.
Yeah, it's a 3-hour movie. I watched it last night because I wanted to watch a Scorsese movie to prep, even though I just watched The Color of Money.
So you watched Silence last night?
I watched it last night.
Wow, it's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, it's probably the 5th time I've seen it because I saw it in theaters twice. It really is an incredible film, and Andrew Garfield and Adam Driver are sensational. I think it's Adam Driver's best performance up to even right now. He's really great in it.
It might be Andrew Garfield's best performance too.
Yeah,
he's terrific in that movie.
It is Andrew Garfield's best performance. But
he went method for that movie.
Yeah,
that's what ended his relation with Emma Stone, I heard.
Yeah, he went celibate for like a year. She's like, "Come on, Andrew, I gotta get it in."
What about me?
I mean, I don't blame her, man. I don't blame her. I actually saw them once.
In person?
Yeah.
Where?
I was leaving a yoga class.
You went to yoga class? When?
It was a friend of a friend.
Cuando?
It was a friend, and she teaches hot yoga. So I went to one of her classes, and I'm leaving the yoga studio, and they were walking in, and he had his beard and long hair. I think he must have been prepping for this movie.
So probably like 2015.
Yeah, it was 2015, and I didn't say anything, bro. I was just like, did I just walk by Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield?
Yep.
It was so fucking weird. I couldn't believe it. But yeah, that movie's really sensational, and nobody's seen it. But I think that, movies about faith and about religion, nobody really seems to be interested in them anymore in terms of the popular culture. Obviously, there's a place for them. The Chosen was second in the box office this past weekend.
Mm-hmm.
That Christian show.
But that's a TV series, yeah.
But it seems like anything addressing those themes doesn't seem to be a box office contender anymore. But it's a really incredible movie because, I mean, this is a theme that has been an extremely important, indelible part of humanity for thousands of years. The idea of religion, the idea of an afterlife, the idea of faith. It's something every civilization has followed fiercely in many ways throughout the entire course of human history up until basically now. So I think that it's a theme that is highly resonant and still, I mean, it's in our bones, it's in our history, these cultures that were so defined by religion. And so I think that movies about religion are fascinating because how much of an impact religion had on the development of our species, of our civilizations. And the trials of faith and the questioning of faith and the questioning of religion and of an afterlife and of all these things, they're very difficult themes to think about And I think most people nowadays don't even consider them and don't even want to think about them because, it's easy to not think about stuff like that. They're difficult topics, but I think in movies like that, like Silence, that address it head on, and the entire movie is about that, the crisis of faith, the crisis of do you believe in a religion, and how strongly do you believe in it? Is it so important to you that you'll risk your life for it, that you'll die for it? Or will you give it up to protect yourself if you're put in that situation? It also talks about, the people who were persecuted in that country just for persecuted in that country for just for having a different faith. Christians were killed by the thousands in Japan in that era. Obviously, it's not like that now, but every country and culture has a dark history and past, and that's one of Japan's dark pasts is how they treated Christians and Catholics in their country, who had to live in secret and practice their religion privately. Whereas we're lucky to live in a place where you can practice any religion you want without persecution. I think that we're lucky to live in a place like that.
Yeah, perspective shifted so much in terms of its view on religion for the culture in the modern world. I mean, a lot of people look at that movie and they look at the missionaries as the villains of the film.
Yeah.
You can have that perspective. It's totally fine. It's a justified
They came into a foreign country and started spreading a religion.
Exactly. So the culture's changed so much with its approach to religion. Not very many religious films are made anymore. If they do, they're usually boycotted, or a lot of theaters won't even play them anymore, which is really interesting how much it's changed because, Gibson's movie,
Passion of the
Christ made so much goddamn money.
600 mil.
That he took all in his own pockets. That all went to his bank account.
Half of it did.
A lot of it went, yeah. So he made several $100 million off that movie. So there's an audience for it, but the culture, it's become frowned upon religion. The practice of religion, specifically Catholicism, Christianity, is the most frowned upon religion in Western civilization, which is really interesting how it's shifted so much in 10 years to no one wants to see a movie like that. People don't want to see it because of the pop culture has taken over as the main religion of the world, you could say right now for industrial civilizations.
Well, people I think have replaced religion with different things, not just pop culture, but you could say that politics can be a religion for people.
Politics or pop culture.
Yeah, okay. You'd say popular
Absolutely, it's taken over pop culture.
Okay, so the different facets of popular culture is what you're saying.
Pop culture isn't just movies. It can be all sorts of things.
Okay.
It can be spicy chicken wings is pop culture. You know what I mean? It's all
Sure.
Burger King's pop culture.
I love
all kinds of pop
Whopper.
culture, not just movies.
So yeah, pop culture has taken the place of religion for a lot of people.
But then you look at a filmmaker like Martin Scorsese and so many other filmmakers from other different countries using motifs of religion in their films and spirituality. And I think they're really important movies to watch, whether you believe in that kind of religion or they have that same faith as them or not. But Martin Scorsese is a deeply religious person. It's impossible to talk about his filmography without highlighting his spirituality, without highlighting his faith, and his movies that deal with it, like Silence, obviously dealing with faith and the loss of faith with Liam Neeson's character.
It's about that movie is very much about Scorsese's crisis with his own faith in his 40s and 30s.
And that's why he made Last Temptation of Christ, was trying to understand his faith better. But it's really interesting that he made a movie like Silence, or even made a movie like Kundun after he made The Last Temptation of Christ. Oh, I'm sorry, Kundun was before Last Temptation of Christ. Was it?
Kundun, hold on, 1 second.
Which one was first? I believe Last Temptation of Christ was
Last Temptation was way before.
Yeah, that was 1980s, right?
Yeah, Willem Dafoe was still really young.
1980s.
Kundun was in the 90s.
Okay, so it's interesting that he made both those, because when Martin Scorsese made The Last Temptation of Christ, he was still filming it, and that movie was getting boycotted by people by the
there were protests.
Tens of thousands.
Massive protests
outside the studios, in public spaces in cities, boycotting the movie. They had not even seen a trailer. They hadn't even seen a poster. Just the fact that the movie was getting made. And then once it came out, it was not really well received from religious people very well, and religious and faith-based audience members very well.
It was being protested, and it got a terrible reaction because it portrayed Jesus in a more human light.
Exactly.
He has sex with a woman in the film. He things like that where people didn't want to see that. I mean, no matter, I'm not a religious person, but I do think that a person named Jesus Christ existed in the past and influenced a lot of people. It would only make sense that he would have he had to have had relationships with other people. He had to have had probably intimate relationships with a couple of people.
It's possible.
So
We don't know.
Yeah,
we
it's
didn't
totally
grow up back then.
possible.
We didn't
So,
live.
and he was experimenting with that idea, and he was destroyed for it.
The whole point of him making that movie exactly was to experiment with the idea of making Jesus more human and what that would look like, because it's probably more realistic to, if Jesus Christ walked this earth, that's probably what
You
he'd
gotta
be
think
like.
about it. He didn't know that he was the Son of God until he was like 30.
True.
So
yeah.
he lived up till his 30s. Clearly, he would have had an intimate relationship with someone.
It's a really well-made movie.
Yeah.
Willem Dafoe is phenomenal. De Niro was
Great
not,
performance.
De Niro was like, they thought De Niro was going to be in this movie, but he and De Niro...
Jesus.
De Niro... yeah,
I'm Jesus.
You talking to me? You praying for me? De Niro and Marty had like an 8-year hiatus from working with each other, and this is during that period where they just didn't... After Raging Bull, I think they took like 8 years off because they probably needed a break from each other, even though Raging Bull saved Martin Scorsese's life because De Niro made him do it pretty much. But Last Temptation of Christ, I think that's an important movie in Scorsese's filmography that not a lot of people look at anymore, not a lot of people watch, because people just don't watch religious films anymore, which is interesting because, like you said, it's been part of human civilization, human culture.
It doesn't matter the religion.
So long.
Every civilization was... religion was a major aspect of every civilization.
Pop culture is just ruined. It's just destroyed religion in people's lives. Not that you have to have religion in your life, but for the vast existence of humanity, religion's been a major factor.
And it is,
but there are pros and cons to both.
Yeah, but I think you're right. I think it's interesting to see Catholicism really is the only religion that's been singled out. If you think about Judaism, Buddhism, Muslim.
What do you mean in terms of the culture?
Yeah, in terms of being looked at in a negative light. It really is the only one.
Judaism, Jewish people are some of the most persecuted people on the planet, so...
Yeah, but you wouldn't, like, I'm talking about pop culture.
Like a movie.
Yeah, I'm talking about pop culture.
People, like, in terms of, like, a movie, people don't want to see movies about Catholicism anymore.
Example, like the Safdies, they put Jewish religious culture heavily in Uncut Gems.
Yeah.
But no one would call that a Judeo faith-based movie in any way, even though there's quite a bit of it in that film. But I feel like if you put Catholic stuff in a movie just a little bit, it would be called. It would have that stigma against it.
You can even, when you watch Raging Bull, when was the last time you watched it?
A month ago.
There's religious symbology all over that movie. Statues, crucifixes, portraits of Mary.
It's part of that culture,
Jesus,
yeah.
Part of the culture. It's interesting to put it with a character like Jake LaMotta because it adds humanity to the character of Jake LaMotta, even though he's such a horrible person. He abuses everybody around him. He uses everybody around him. The religious undertones and motifs in that film in his apartment with his wife, that really brings humanity to the character.
But also, the religious tones really parallel Fame in that film. When you look at the boxer, center of the ring, middleweight champion, 50,000 people screaming, worshiping him on this altar, the boxing arena, lights flashing. They're worshiping this man who is enacting bouts of violence against another man. And in a lot of ways, it parallels the idea of religion, of worshiping an icon. Jake LaMotta, for a time, was an icon to people. And that also lends to celebrity, the worshiping of celebrity. And so you could definitely see the motifs of religion and why they're put into Raging Bull. Because for a lot of people, the boxing arena is their temple. It is their church. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
that's where they worship. That's their Sunday mass. Their temple is going to the boxing fight, going to the next fight.
There are even religious motifs in Goodfellas, Scorsese's most popular film of all time. So many scenes with motifs of religion, whether it be Judaism or Catholicism, Christianity.
Because Henry Hill's a Jew.
Henry Hill's half Jew. Half Jewish, half Christian.
Only the good half.
Only that's Karen tells me you're half Jewish, just the good half. I'll put that cross away before my mother sees you. So Henry Hill's a really interesting character. His religious, not necessarily.
I'm sorry, he's Catholic. He's pretending to be Jewish.
Yeah, he's half Jewish.
Is he half Jewish?
He's half Jewish.
Okay.
Yeah, no, he's legitimately like half Jewish.
He's like, seriously.
That's why
he's authentically half Jewish.
So there are motifs of religion in Goodfellas that people like, I think maybe they don't notice too well, but it's part of the scenes, like what I just said, when he's hiding the cross from Karen's mother. Karen hides the cross from his mother. Don't let my mother see you with that cross. But also,
I'm sorry. I think he's Catholic, 100%, and she's pretending he's Jewish.
so he just says I'm half Jewish as a lie.
I'm pretty sure.
Well, they get married in a Jewish wedding,
Yeah, for her family.
but he has.
It's all pretend.
No, you can't lie and not be Jewish.
Maybe.
Anyways,
someone will fact check.
And clearly,
Someone will comment.
Clearly, this is a little thing.
Thing.
Hey, you look it up while I'll
Okay,
I'll talk about because his father's because he's half Italian.
He's Irish Italian.
He's Irish Italian.
There's no way he's Jewish. If he's Irish Italian.
Is he? Yeah. Okay. So
He's just lying to please her family.
okay. Anyways, so back to the religious motifs in Goodfellas. That's probably the most recognizable one, hiding the cross, and they have a Jewish wedding as well, breaking the glass, Mazel Tov. But also Henry Hill, the character, this criminal, murderer. Why does he wear a golden cross? Is it because he has faith? Does he believe in Jesus Christ? Does he believe in God in a Christianity sense? Does he believe in that religion? Or is he wearing it like out of respect for a higher power? Is he wearing it because it's part of the culture that he's into? The gangsters, the Italian gangsters who are all criminals, a lot of them are killers in this movie. These characters but they still like wear golden crosses. Is it to repent, or is it kind of just a recognition of a God that you don't technically believe in? It's really interesting that these murderers and gangsters are wearing gold crosses.
I think that culture, those people, Roman Catholics were religious. I think that
They're very,
very religious, but
we're
just
Roman Catholic baptized, confirmed.
yeah.
And religion was important to our grandparents.
Yeah,
on
but
both sides, the Irish and Italians.
But I also think, Goodfellas in particular is a movie that really deconstructs unregulated capitalism in America. And you could say the mobsters and the gangsters are corporatization of the corporate entities of America taking advantage of an unregulated market and taking everything they want illegally. And they basically are, the unregulated housing market, the unregulated stock market, the price fixing by major corporations in the marketplace.
Fuck you, pay me.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so, even though they're religious people, I think the whole point of that movie is showing how this is the American dream that has been skewed through deregulation and to the extremes of you either barely get by and struggle to survive, or you take whatever you want as a criminal. And that basically is like the unregulated capitalism of the free marketplace in America.
That's a really great point, because it's their own community. And we've talked about in previous episodes about Italian culture in America, how they kind of policed themselves for a very long time because they didn't have help from the government. They didn't have help from police. So they were in charge of enforcing themselves and creating their own rules. And obviously there's going to be a hierarchy. And obviously the most powerful, terrifying, and scary people are going to be in control.
100%.
100%.
There's another style thing, a trademark of
Let's get into it.
Scorsese's.
Another style.
I've seen a couple movies.
Anthony watched Silence last night, everybody.
Something that Scorsese does that to this day very few filmmakers really do, but it was extremely common thing in film for all the first several decades. Credit sequences. So opening credit sequences, they used to be the way a movie always started, but now it depends on the filmmaker. Like someone like Chris Nolan never has an opening title sequence since Memento. But then you have someone like David Fincher, loves opening title credits. And it just depends on the filmmaker. Scorsese is a little bit of both, but he has always loved opening credit sequences. He's always loved it. And he's worked with two main graphic designers, Saul Bass, who basically is the father of opening credit sequence design.
Casinos is so good.
Yeah, so Saul Bass designed Casino, Goodfellas, and Cape Fear. He did many of Hitchcock's films, but those are the three Scorsese films that he did. Casino is probably it could be the greatest title sequence ever. You have incredible flashing lights of Vegas, and then it ends in this explosion of a man flying through flames. And it's just like, what the fuck? It's amazing. It's incredible.
He passed away a few months after the movie came out. Too.
Yeah, unfortunately. But he is like the legend, the father of opening title sequence design, especially thanks to his work with Hitchcock. But with Cape Fear, you had the beautiful font over the waves background, really, really stunning. Then Goodfellas, you have the titles flying across the screen like a car, like whooshing by. But then he also worked with most of his films with a man named Dan Perry, who, behind Saul Bass, is clearly the number 2 of graphic design with his title credits. He has done so many incredible films. Most notably, he designed the Star Wars logo, the Star Wars font, and the opening credits he designed.
That the Star Wars.
Yep.
Wow.
It's Dan Perry. So if anyone doesn't know his name, now you do. He is probably, right after Saul Bass, he's the most important designer of titles. But so for Scorsese's films, he did many of them. Raging Bull, beautiful font. Taxi Driver had this incredible yellow font. And then Gangs of New York had this like great like brass metallic font. It looked like it was like kind of 3D, but the font was all in different sizes and shapes. But it looked like it was like a stamp, the metal part of a stamp that you would stamp with. It looked really cool. And then the King of Comedy, it's this beautiful like Art Deco show business kind of font that plays, like I said, over the woman's hands on the glass of the window of the car. And then you have the King After Hours, which is great, like retro neon-y font. And then the After Hours logo, the O is actually the clock, because the movie is just like this ticking clock of this like night that never ends. It's if you haven't seen After Hours,
So good.
it's one of the best dark comedies of all time. It really is. And then New York is this beautiful neon lights, kind of like what you would see on the marquee sign of a movie theater. Those are just like some of the best ones. But Dan Perry, one of the greatest designers of credits, he did many of the credits of Scorsese movies. Most of his movies start with credits. Many of them don't, but most of them do. And he always had such an important interest in conveying the theme and the tone and the style of the film in the credits of in the opening credits, because if you're going to have the opening credits, it's going to set the stage for what you're about to watch. And all you have is, you can either have text and music, or you can have text laced over footage. I really like it when you have an entire sequence built around the text, because sometimes, so I have this weird view of when the credits are laced over the film, like it could be like an opening scene and then there's credits playing, it kind of makes me feel like it's like a TV show. Like a lot of TV shows back in the day, they would open with credits while it was playing, like CSI or whatever. You would have like the opening credits playing over like the first like 3 minutes of the episode. And for me, when I watch the opening credits that are taking place like over an actual scene, it takes me out of it. It also feels like it's not, the filmmaker's treating that scene as not as important to get your full attention, where you're reading credits of names while you're watching the scene take place. I don't like that. But I do like what Tarantino did with Hateful Eight, where you have this beautiful long take introduction of the landscape, pulling back to see the statue of the crucifix with the beautiful snow everywhere. It's not a scene, there's no dialogue or stuff, but it's just basically he designed his title sequence with the title credits playing.
It's an overture.
An overture. That's a great way to start the film. But I'll get distracted by credits being laced over while I'm trying to watch actors perform and the scene take place. I don't like that. So I prefer when the title sequence is a separate entity with the credits playing, designed for that as a sequence. The only film that I can think of off the top of my head that I think it really works otherwise is the letter sequence of Zodiac. The credits play while the letter's being delivered. But it's no dialogue or anything, but it's still like a lot of sequences cut together. But that's the only instance I can think of where I actually enjoy credits being laced over a scene.
No, I agree. It does distract me sometimes. Sometimes directors do a good job hiding it. But, there is something to it. I wonder if there's some contractual restraints in terms of...
It's all style. Old movies sometimes would do that quite a bit.
No, I know, yeah. But maybe sometimes they have to, like, at a certain minute of your film, you have to get this credits in. But it's interesting. But I prefer even, like, what he did with Tar this year.
That was beautiful, yeah.
having the entire credits roll before the movie even starts, which was tremendous. There's still so much to talk about with Marty.
We haven't even scratched the surface.
Let's get. Well, we scratched the surface. We've
Okay.
clawed the surface.
Well, hold on. So there's just a couple more. I won't get.
Can I talk?
Yeah.
You just went on like a 17-minute tangent.
Well, it sounded like you were gonna start. You were about to say, "Let's get into his films."
No.
What were you gonna say?
Get off your jump to conclusions, Matt Anthony.
I don't know. I
You
know
went
you
17
pretty well.
minutes on opening sequences.
Everyone's fallen asleep by now. Man, is he still talking about credits?
I think there's something important that we haven't even touched on yet at all that is present in pretty much every Martin Scorsese movie, except for a few.
His eyebrows?
His eyebrows, the caterpillars. Violence.
Oh, yes.
A lot of his movies are highly violent, which kind of, in a lot of people's eyes, might be contradictory to somebody who's so religious and faith-based. But, Martin Scorsese, he has a great vision and philosophy of separating film from real life, which I think a lot of people should try to focus on rather than conflating the two and getting them mixed up and thinking that you see something in a movie that means it's real or it should happen in real life or they're trying to say they're promoting that in real life. Completely the opposite. He has the great balance of spirituality and profanity in a lot of his movies. A lot of his movies are very profane. A lot of graphic violence, some sexuality here and there. And that's
Vulgar
why...
language.
Exactly. I mean, Wolf of Wall Street is the most F-bombs of all time in a theatrical wide-release movie. The profane is the reason why he received so few critical recognitions from film communities and institutions for so long. Of course, yeah, he won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, but French film culture respects filmmakers and artists so much more, despite content being maybe a little too profane and vulgar for people. I think they've always done a great job recognizing talent where talent's due. That's why Taxi Driver, standing ovation, Palme d'Or, but didn't really get received super well by audiences. Critically was phenomenal, yeah. But the profanity in his films and the vulgarity and the violence, it's what he knows. We're talking about earlier his roots. Marty grew up Elizabeth Street, Little Italy, Little Sicily, New York City, in a low-income family. He was surrounded by mobsters and criminals, organized crime, and churches and priests. That's where he grew up. That was part of his life. He's been on many interviews talking about violence and why it's present in his films. It's because it's what he knows. That's what he grew up around. He saw it in his everyday life. He saw a lot of violence growing up. That's just where he came from. So obviously, like I said, he's a very authentic filmmaker. That's going to be put in a lot of his films. And when we're talking about the stories he tells, he's telling the stories of a lot of violent people, criminals, bad guys. Of course, you're going to have to add the violence to those films to be authentic to what it's really like, to tell the true story, to tell a story of what it's truly these characters go through and what they do with their lives. It's a part of the story. It's a part of the character. Marty's not promoting violence. If anything, they're anti-violence films because in every one of his movies with these highly violent characters, these highly manipulative bad guys, we see the glamour and the allure of the lifestyle and the immediate early rewards. We're seeing these characters usually midway through their life, through their peak. We're meeting Henry Hill when he's bum 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 bum. It's Henry Hill, rags to riches. He's a gangster. He's so cool. Jordan Belfort, he's making $1 million a week almost. He's making $51 million a year. Who doesn't want that lifestyle? But you see the cost of what these people and these characters give up.
Raging Bull is his most violent movie, I would argue.
Probably, yeah. I mean, not a ton of death. I mean, Goodfellas might.
Not death-wise, but violence-wise. But I would argue that Raging Bull is his most violent film. I mean, it's not death, but we're getting violent acts upon women, family members, extremely brutal, outside. That's just outside of the actual fights within the ring. So it is extremely violent because Jake LaMotta was an extremely violent person.
True. But then, I mean, something like Taxi Driver, we were talking about earlier, it almost got an X rating because of the violence in it. People weren't ready for it. Audiences weren't ready for it. He was forced to cut sequences. He was forced to change the coloring of that climactic event of Travis Bickle rescuing Jodie Foster's character from her basically pimp imprisonment and it almost destroyed him having to go through that sequence. And when he was getting approval for it, they wanted him to cut the entire sequence, cut the entire moment of Travis going to save her. That would have ruined the entire film. But this is an example of Marty, with the violence he was putting in his films. It was authentic to the characters. It was realistic to the characters. It told the story. It wasn't just to be violence for something cool to see on camera. It was important to the storytelling. And fortunately, with his connections, with Spielberg and some other people in De Palma, they managed to show the movie Taxi Driver, for example, with the violence, and have screenings with film critics, get that film rating reduced to an R after cutting a few sequences, desaturating the color and making it a little orange. The blood looks a little orange, which actually enhances the sequence.
Looks like pink.
Kind of enhances the sequence if you watch it. So it actually, might have played to his strength. Only ended up having to cut a few things here and there. But so many films he's been battling with film institutions, with the rating systems to get the cut that he wants in his movies because of the violence he has in his films. But it's so interesting to see that the world's changed so much that these movies seem so tame compared, despite, something like Joker was a movie that was getting that potentially got an X rating because just the subject matter itself and the tone it created. We've talked about this multiple times, where same thing happened with Taxi Driver and some more Martin Scorsese movies. Just the tone that he creates scares people and scares critics and ratings reviewers.
It's odd because you watch a movie like John Wick and he kills 200 dudes and you cheer him on. And that has no problem getting an R rating. And it's pretty graphic and gruesome. There's gore. They're showing the blood. They're showing the gore. And they're showing people getting
shot in the
face from point blank range over and over again. But in a way, the tone makes it people are enthusiastic about it and it's fun and it's more entertaining. And then you look at Scorsese, I think the way you depict violence has a lot to do with it. And even, I don't know, it's odd. And how some filmmakers Scorsese and Tarantino are judged so harshly for the violence in their movies. But if you think about it, all of their movies combined doesn't have as much violence as a typical violent movie that comes out nowadays. There's more death in a John Wick movie than in any of Scorsese's movies.
Violent Night's coming out this year. That's David Harbour as Santa Claus killing people. That's going to get an R rating, no problem. But the subject matter, the tone, the characterization, the story is so powerful that scares people more than someone killing 150 people in a movie.
But also, the visceral nature that Scorsese has as an artist with the camera, that's what really makes the difference. Because if you think about, all right, so talk about Violent Night or any other movie that's come out the last several years that are like that, extremely violent. It can be gory, but nothing will make your skin crawl like Joe Pesci having his guy crush the head of the gangster in Casino.
The Vice?
With the Vice grip. That, just thinking about it, just makes my friggin' skin crawl. And the way he shoots it, the sound effects he uses, but also the way he shoots things, the way he shoots Joe Pesci's death in that movie.
That is one of the the hardest scenes for me to ever watch.
It's horrible.
Sequence.
It's so difficult.
The baseball bat scene.
Just pounding him with the baseball bat, and it's so brutal. And you're just looking at just two men are getting killed. And
by baseball bats and buried alive.
Yeah. But
terrible.
That's more disturbing than 200 people getting shot in a John Wick movie. It without a doubt, you feel it. And it's just impact. It's just shocking. And this guy is a terrible human being and he kills people for fun, and he's just a monster. But Scorsese films it in a way that makes you feel oh my God, it's horrible. And no one else really can do that. Tarantino can film violence pretty well. But I think it's got to be just because the visceral, raw quality that he brings to violence that no other filmmaker can. But I still think that some of the most disturbing violence I've ever seen in film comes in Raging Bull, when he punches his wife in the face and she gets that black eye from him. But just the sound effect and the way it's filmed, it's just filmed with a wide angle, one shot. It's not cut together. It's just she just collapses. Oh my god! And then when he attacks his brother when they're at the dinner table, and he just charges into him and just drags him into the other room, and just bashes on him. It's like it's so much more. It's more disturbing than like any horror movie I've watched, and it's because of the way he portrays it and how you feel like these are real people and like this is a real person doing this to another real person, and it's so horrifying. It's not extravagant violence. It's not super gory. It's not torture porn, but yet it still has that same disturbing nature to it. It's just the talent that he has as a director.
He's not promoting it. It's terrible.
Yeah.
It's just it's how he grew up. It's what he knows. Great quote from Martin Scorsese. Violence itself is a matter of expression, and it's the way of life. And it's the way of life for these people. Then you have to be as truthful as possible. It's not pleasant. So he's being as truthful as possible to the characters he's telling stories about. And if you're not into seeing violence on screen, then you just don't watch a lot of Martin Scorsese movies. That's the thing. It is. That's
Just watch Age of Innocence.
The Age of Innocence, you could say, is
Emotionally
violent film, big time. Like absolutely, that it's just like emotional punches versus physical punches. Like that and Raging Bull are actually, you can see similarities between those two films.
It's a wonderful costume drama, also with wonderful credit design by Saul Bass. I missed that one. He did the credits for that, and it's just beautiful. But Age of Innocence is Daniel Day-Lewis plays a man who is in love with Michelle Pfeiffer's character, even though he is promised to wed Winona Ryder's character. And it's about the social circles of these people. It's about high-class society of New York, extravagance, but it has great drama. But it is emotionally devastating in a lot of ways. Michelle Pfeiffer is amazing, but you've never seen Daniel Day-Lewis like this. And I mean, kudos to Winona Ryder for being so young and acting in Tim Burton movie and a Scorsese movie like back to back. It's friggin' crazy.
Best actor nom for this.
Yeah,
Best actress nom.
she's remarkable. But it's the only Scorsese movie of its kind. It really is, I think, the outlier in his filmography because it's so romantic. And it's so emotionally based in terms of intimacy. He in a lot of his films, he's basically not shown too much. He hasn't showcased intimacy too much in his films. You'll get hints of it. In Boxcar Bertha, he has a sex scene, but that's because Roger Corman made him put it in there.
The Aviator might have the most sex in any of his movies.
Yeah, The Aviator.
There's a sex scene in The Departed.
Yeah, The Departed.
couple.
Yeah, with Vera Farmiga.
Mhm.
But it's not really a sex scene. It's like they're just like getting
About to.
Yeah.
About to.
But he cuts away.
Your vulnerability, it's freaking me out right now.
Is it real?
Yeah, I think it is.
And then there's the Goodfellas. There's not really that much sex. There's not sex in Goodfellas. It's actually interesting. You look at both Spielberg and Scorsese. They don't really show sex in their movies.
They show sexy scenes and sexy things,
But they won't actually. They'll never have a sex scene.
well, Cape Fear, there is a disturbing sex scene.
yeah, that's not a sex scene. That's something else.
It starts out as a sex scene and turns into a sexual assault.
Yeah, getting back to the violence. But Age of Innocence is really a remarkable film. But Cape Fear, that you brought that up, what a great remake. And De Niro really transforms in that role. And so Scorsese's really made two pure horror films, Cape Fear and Shutter Island. And there really are two of the best there are. Cape Fear. I remember I hadn't watched it until I was in my 20s.
Same, yeah.
And
I think we watched it together
we
for
must
the
have
first
watched
time.
I think so. And then
in the basement, in the dungeon, in the movie dungeon.
But then because it's for some reason he's made so many great films that movies like Cape Fear are never in like if there's like a top 10 list, it never makes the top 10 list.
Like Scorsese's top 10 movies, yeah.
But it really is an incredible movie. It's insane. De Niro's performance is really one of his best. But also, it's such a great showcase for his cinematography and editing style, where he really portrays panic and anxiety so brilliantly. And Nick Nolte is great in that film as the lead. But the paranoia, especially when they're like boarding up their house and closing all the shutters, and you get so many push ins and zoom ins and zoom outs and quick cuts, and you're all over the place with the coverage, and you feel the paranoia that the character's feeling with. And there's so many cigarettes that are just smoked in that movie. But then great editing, like when he kills the guard with the piano wire, but then we go into the kitchen and it cuts to it. We think it's the maid from behind, but it's really Max Cady dressed as the maid. It's, oh my God, what a great cut. It's just remarkable filmmaking. He just brings the most basic, simple techniques, but uses them in such a remarkable way to really illustrate what he wants to portray in the scene like that. And it's just an insane movie. But even just like the end on the boat where you have this, but the way he shoots scenes, he makes them so visually interesting. So when they're on the boat and Max Cady shows himself and he handcuffs Nick Nolte, and he's got the girls like where he wants them, and he pulls out the flare to showcase how he's put himself through all the pain a man can deal with. And so pain is really nothing to him. And then he lights a flare that he's holding in his hand, and he lets the molten material in the flare just pour and ooze onto his hand. He's like, I can take this, no problem. But the way 99% of filmmakers would just film that, like just with like a static shot or maybe handheld. But the way that Scorsese films it is he starts the camera up high with the flare lit, and then he tracks the camera downwards, and then it finishes with the flare in Max Cady have risen at the top of the frame into this position of power. And Scorsese's work, especially how we talk about when he uses the camera work in that way in certain films, he expresses so much just with such simple techniques and simple movements. But even the smallest movement like that, from just going from top to bottom, conveys so much to the audience in just a 2-second frame. And every other filmmaker would just shoot it straight on without even moving the camera. But he does this amazing drop down, and it's just adds so much to just what appears to be a simple moment.
Cape Fear also has motif of religion, Catholicism. I mean, look at Max Cady's back tattoo. He has a giant crucifix, which also doubles as the justice scale. Was it justice versus something else? I can't remember what the other scale is. So there's a ton of motifs of religion in Cape Fear. Such a great film. Max Cady quotes scripture multiple times in that film, but in that final sequence, something that's so great and that I love in so many of Martin Scorsese's movies and many of his climaxes of his movies is he puts the audience in this position of kind of a juror or a judge of the characters. In that sequence, Max Cady, his face has been burned. He's got everyone tied up, like you said, and he's speaking to the heavens as like a lawyer, like, well, what do you think? What do you think, Lord? Should we give him a second chance? Or like, actually, I rebut that. Like he's talking, he's going back and forth, looking in camera like he's speaking to God in that moment. And we're kind of judging Nick Nolte's character here because, yes, he was Max Cady's lawyer, and legally he didn't fulfill his job and his oath, but morally he did by putting this guy away. So Martin Scorsese constantly puts the audience in the shoes of a judge or juror, where we're judging the characters and the lead characters on their morality. Great example of Cape Fear right there, but also movies like, you could say at the end of Goodfellas, we're in a courtroom again. We're judging Henry Hill on everything he's done. By the end of the film, he's the hero, he's the protagonist. But do we look at him the same way we did? He ratted on everybody. He did, I guess you could say from the law's perspective, the right thing, putting all these criminals in jail. But from an audience perspective, how do we judge him? We get to decide for ourselves. Or The Departed, the end of that film, Billy Costigan, yes, he's got Sullivan. He's going to bring him in. What is this, a fucking citizen's arrest?
I can't wait to see you explain this to a fucking Suffolk County jury. This is going to be fucking fun.
We get to judge the situation, and Costigan at this point in the film, in The Departed, has become a criminal in a lot of ways. He's been
accomplice to murder.
He's undercover so long that he doesn't even know if he's a cop anymore a lot of the time. So we're judging Costigan at this time. Taxi Driver, Travis Bickle saving Jodie Foster's character in the third act of the film, the climax. it's a heroic deed he's done, but he's also killed people. He's a murderer now. Does that justify what he's done? We're judging him now at the end of the film. So many of his movies, Raging Bull, Jake LaMotta, washed up boxer, heavyweight champion. We've seen him put his family through hell. But now we're trying to, like, Scorsese's making us feel empathetic for him because he's washed up and now he
lost everything.
He lost everything. And he's just kind of this pathetic person putting on these shows to try to reclaim, like what you said earlier, where he's being worshipped for people. He's trying to keep it. The Irishman, Frank, the character De Niro plays, he's a murderer. He's a hitman. He paints houses for a living. He paints houses for Jimmy Hoffa. We know what happens with him and Jimmy Hoffa in the movie. If you haven't seen it, I won't spoil it. But, by the end of the film, which is cross-cut because there's so many time jumps in that movie, he's an old man, and he's doing kind of not the last rites with a priest, but he's asking for forgiveness. Would you forgive this person? The crimes he's committed, the people he's killed, we're judging him. So many of Scorsese's movies end where we're judging characters. We're kind of on a jury. We're laying judgment on their deeds, their actions throughout the story that we've been watching. And I think it's such an incredible thing to do because it actively engages you into the story, actively engages you with the characters. You root for so many of these characters. Then by the end of the movie, you're like, holy crap, they were such a villain to everyone around them, but I love them, and you're just torn. You don't know what to think of them.
Wolf of Wall Street, too.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. He's taken, and we have to lay judgment on him.
Yeah. Another great trademark of Scorsese that he is really just the master at is montage. Montage is in so many of his films, and this can be both montage with music, but also with narration. Goodfellas is obviously an easy example of montage. There are so many montage sequences in Goodfellas for every act, basically, of that movie. I think there are just probably 5 acts, maybe 6 acts of that movie. You get the montage of him being young, you get the montage, the cocaine montage, the things are going good montage. So many montages in that movie. The death montage of all the mobsters. This is just footage that they get laced together and edited together to create a sequence, not as necessarily a scene, but a combination of scenes basically put together in a short amount of time to convey some kind of little sub-story in the plot of the film. But I mean, Mean Streets has a great montage. There's a lot of montages in Taxi Driver of Travis Bickle doing whatever, of him doing things, traveling around the city, driving, or even when he's a great montages of him getting fit again, him going to movie theaters, great montages. Cape Fear has some good montages. Casino has great montages. Lots of narration by De Niro as he rises to power in Vegas. The King of Comedy has great montages. Shutter Island, The Departed has a lot of great montages. It's really Wolf of Wall Street too. Tons of montage. The opening 5 minutes of Wolf of Wall Street is just a montage. After the little person is thrown into the dartboard, then it's just montage for 10 minutes, maybe 10 minutes of Jordan Belfort explaining who he is and what kind of person he is. That's all just a montage sequence. The Aviator, there's a lot of montages of the Aviator showcasing different aspects and evolutions of his career and his aspirations, especially also the projects he's working on from decade to decade. Montages are an important part of film and filmmaking, and they're used oftentimes to great effect. But I mean, sometimes they can be kind of underwhelming. But Scorsese really understands when to use them and how to use them. And I think montages often get looked at as just being the workout montage or just being the 80s pump up montage, but it's so much more than that. You can really illustrate incredible depth of storytelling with the montage sequence, and he really is probably the master of it.
He does it when he's showcasing a period of time passing, a large period of time passing quickly. But he manages to tell a great story at the same time as doing it and really provoking the audience with the story as well. What else is there to talk about with Marty? So we have...
So what do you think? What are his most underrated films? I'll give you 3 options. I can tell you mine first if you want.
I would say off the top of my head, I would say Cape Fear, absolutely underrated. I feel like Gangs of New York is a really underrated movie because I don't think it won a single award, got nominations, but people leave it out of his top 5 every time I see it. I don't know. I mean, I'd have to make out my list, but Gangs of New York is a tremendous piece of filmmaking that I think kind of is forgotten now.
And acting.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
people make their top 5 Marty lists. I don't think I ever really see it in there. Not that it has to be, but I think it's one of those movies that people don't talk about. The Aviator. That might be that. I mean, that's a tremendous movie. It's so good, but I feel like his most underrated movie is Raging Bull because it might be the best movie he's ever made, and no one freaking talks about it. No one talks about
Which
Raging
one?
Bull. Raging Bull. No one talks about that movie.
No, I don't. It's an 8 point. It's like an 8.5 on IMDb.
I never see it anywhere on
Yeah, it's always on
social
lists.
media. Nothing.
Well, I mean,
Film
it's
people.
not on TikTok, but it's on lists.
Okay, I guess since it's top
It's always
200.
revered. It's got a high rating on IMDb.
Okay,
It's
but I
not-
would say Cape Fear. I love that movie's so good. And then let me run through his filmography.
Hold on, I'll tell you mine. I have 3. The Color of Money, which is the sequel to The Hustler, Paul Newman's film, and Paul Newman reprises his role with newcomer Tom Cruise. It's an amazing movie. It only has a 7.0 rating on IMDb.
7-0.
So I watched it again last week. I've seen it now probably 10 times, and I give it like a 9.8 out of 10. It's really incredible, and the performances, the story, it's perfect. But also the way he films the pool sequences. I watched this last week, and there were like a few shots where I was just like, how the fuck did he do that? How did he do that? But what's even more impressive is Tom Cruise being obviously the obsessive skill achiever he is. He got so good at pool that he was able to carry out really complex and professional level pool shots one after another. So Scorsese was able to do a lot of long takes of Tom Cruise doing these frigging insane shots.
He did every shot except for the one that where the ball
jump.
the ball
The jump.
He and Tom Cruise probably could have learned it, but Scorsese's like, we don't have time to do that.
Scorsese said he could have learned it, but it would have been a waste of a day for him to learn the move. So he had a professional do that. But Tom Cruise did the rest of the pool sequences for that film. But because he got so good at pool, Scorsese was able to do really complex long takes of moving the camera all over the pool tables, going from ball to ball, angle to angle, spinning around the pool table, all without cutting, and while photographing Tom Cruise at the same time because he got so good at pool. But some of the shots he got in that, I mean, there's this shot of where leading a yellow ball, we're leading it on like a super macro close-up, leading the ball as it goes towards the hole, the pocket. And I watched it and I was like, how the fuck did he do that? Like, how do you film that? How did he film that? It's unbelievable. But there are so many great shots in that movie. And just the story is really fantastic. And I love how the movie, it still was about Paul Newman because he's the guy. He's the hustler. It was like a kind of like a Top Gun Maverick approach in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I bet you Tom revisited it when he was making Top Gun Maverick.
He revisited a few of his
like
movies.
a great legacy sequel.
But then also Hugo, I think is a really stunning movie. It has so many great qualities, but also like when you think of kids movies and you think of young children's movies, you never think of
Hugo.
Well, I'm saying you never think of real artistry, like great artistry. Nowadays you think of extravagance, of like crazy stuff happening, of a lot of humor, of simple filmmaking and simple artistry, like nothing really pushing the boundaries. But with Hugo, it's a stunning achievement of just the art and the craft of filmmaking, every aspect of it, from the production, cinematography, costuming, acting, the prop work, the CGI, the score. It really is a stunning achievement of every facet of film. And it has all of that, but it's a movie made for children. It's based on children's books. And you don't often see movies made for kids with so much artistic integrity and so much resonance of storytelling and depth and so many themes of loss and abandonment and love and magic and the discovery of what film is, of what cinema can be, of the magic of it. and also tracing the roots in the history of film back into the 20s and 30s. It's really an incredible film. I can't think of another children's movie that even comes close to like what it is in a lot of ways. It's really, I think, a special movie, and in his filmography, it's never really discussed, and I think it is really a special film. And then the final film that I think is extremely underrated is Silence. We talked about it a lot earlier, but it really is like a stunning achievement of film, of storytelling, of powerful themes, the acting. It's just really a resounding, stunning achievement of masterful craftsmanship. And it's a difficult movie about difficult ideas, but it really is extremely human. And it showcases the conflict we all have about trying to understand life and trying to understand the idea of what existence is and what comes after this, and if faith is possible with any of us, and if religion is a possibility for us, and if you are a religious person, the struggle of maintaining your faith in the face of unsurmountable conflict and obstacles, and the perseverance to try and power through that if you are a religious person. It's a really deeply resonant, powerful film that the more times I see it, the just more impressed I am with it.
I agree. Now, Martin Scorsese, like we were talking about earlier, is still so relevant, and even amongst this world of superhero movies, he's still relevant and on the tips of people's tongues. And Scorsese, like we've been talking about, this is a director who's been dealing with controversy for a lot of his career. You know, he's gone to battle with entire religions that he is a part of. He's gone to battle with entire countries, it can do with China. And
China refused to release it.
Yeah. Hence why I think he's been so confident with his opinions about things that we have to talk about, like Marvel movies, his opinions on Marvel movies. Now, he's said that his original big statement that everyone freaked out about was he said Marvel movies aren't cinema. Everyone has interpreted that wrongly, I think, into saying Martin Scorsese says Marvel movies aren't movies. I don't think he ever said anything like that. He just said they aren't cinema. Now, everyone has a right to opinion. Everyone has a subjective opinion about everything. What you consider cinema is completely subjective to you. Of course, Marvel movies are movies. They are films. They are movies that
they play in theaters.
They play in theaters. They are 100% movies. Now, I think that people have been misinterpreting his words and kind of putting words in his mouth that make him seem bad and look bad. And I think it's unfair to Scorsese to not allow him an opinion, since he's a filmmaker who is one of the most important in the history of the art. And whatever you believe in, you have to try to understand his perspective of why he says things like that and why he brought that up. And he tried to showcase that in an article that he wrote, I believe it was for the New York Times, to try to expand on what he meant and try to get people to understand his opinion. This is a person who grew up loving film, and film is his life. And he sees something like a Marvel movie, and he sees it's a fun time. He says it's an amusement park ride. It kind of is, if you think about it. I understand both sides of the story. And for Martin Scorsese, this is a person who every time he makes a movie, he puts his entire life into that film, especially the first 20, 30 years of his career. Every time he made a movie, he didn't know if he was going to come out of it alive. He didn't know if he was going to come out of it financially viable, have a future in the business. A lot of filmmakers, that's how they made their movies. And I think from that perspective, someone like Martin Scorsese, they put their entire life into every single movie they make. They put all of their passion and love that they have for cinema and movies into that movie. Whereas he sees Marvel movies today, not that saying that we don't love them, because we do love Marvel movies. They're a lot of fun. They're a blast. But I think Martin Scorsese's perspective is he sees these movies, and they're kind of, for him, they're probably like factory pressed movies, kind of like TV shows in a lot of ways. They might feel like TV series to him, because even like someone who like him who's made Boardwalk Empire is a huge fan of Sopranos, he doesn't consider long format television cinema either, even if it plays in a movie theater. But hey, Marvel movies play in movie theaters. All movies play in movie theaters. You know, that makes it a movie. But I think Martin Scorsese's perspective is the craft that's put into it, the love that's put into it. Not that there aren't a lot of talented people that work on these movies, but I think maybe the filmmaking, the storytelling of Marvel movies, in Scorsese's opinion, doesn't completely make them cinema in terms of what he's helped create and preserve in terms of the art form, and how much maybe a lot of big budget studio franchise films and trilogies and franchise movie productions have kind of diluted what he's helped create, in his opinion.
Those are great points. And also, I can add to it. And again, I'm prefacing this by saying some of my favorite movies are superhero movies. You know, Dark Knight, it's one of my favorites. I think Iron Man is absolutely amazing. So there's two things that I think I can really see where he's coming from. First of all, the context of what the storytelling is, and also why the story is being told. So if you look at why the story is being told, I mean, yes, I think that a lot of superhero movies started out with good intentions, but I think nowadays it's really getting to the point where, especially with the corporatization of it, a lot of it seems to be like, are these commercials for toys and merchandise to be sold? And how much love and care is really being put into the story? Obviously, love and care is being put into the production. You have great artists working on these. You have great craftsmen and women working on this, amazing artists in the CGI realm, creating these worlds, and great actors and actresses performing. But the intention of the stories, it seems to be focused more on just entertainment and less about story.
And more about next product.
Exactly. Oftentimes, like, one of the things that I have a problem with all of the superhero movies, DC and Marvel, is it seems like every movie that comes out nowadays is a commercial for what's to come. And it seems to be like that's the priority in a film. You were watching, oh, this is what's going to come in 2 or 3 years, these characters and these stories. And that seems to be more important. And that goes to the point where, what's the intention behind the story that they're trying to tell? And now there's always a place for good, dumb, turn your brain off fun. But also, I mean, when movies like these really just like absolutely decimate the box office and destroy their competition and end up being the only thing that a lot of people want to watch, there needs to be a conversation about this. I mean, I've noticed lately, not lately, but I've noticed just through interactions with people, we interact with lots of people, DMs, comments, and I've noticed that, and obviously I'm not saying this for everyone, but there are a lot of people that it seems to be, from my takeaway from interactions with quite a lot of people, is all they're watching is superhero content or Star Wars content. And now, what's the intention behind that? And also, what kind of stories is that? And this goes back to what I was talking about with Scorsese making movies about the real world, making movies about real people, making movies about real stories. You can add aspects to a superhero movie or a fantasy movie or Star Wars or big sci-fi extravagant fest. You can add elements that we can relate to. You can add character details that we can relate to in our real world. But we can't really relate to it when people have special abilities, when people can move something with their mind, when people can lift a building, when people can fly. You know, those are not things that we can relate to in our real world. And one of the reasons why I think Scorsese is the greatest storyteller in cinema history is because all of his movies, like I said earlier, he never goes sci-fi, he never goes fantasy, he never goes superpowered. All of his movies are about real people. They're about real dilemmas, real conflicts, real trials and tribulations. We can't really fully, on a human scale, relate to someone with superpowers who's fighting another person with superpowers. There's no real human connection to that. We can relate to certain aspects to them, but that's not a real thing that can happen in the real world. All of Scorsese's movies, they're about conflicts that happen in the real world and trials and tribulations that people go through in the real world. And the relatability, you can see yourself in characters because You can see that happening in your life. You know, the villains of his movies, it's a husband, you know? It's Henry Hill or it's Jake LaMotta. They're the villain of their story. They're abusing their wife. It's not so cut and dry. It's not a supervillain that you can paint as they're the bad guy. They're just trying to take over the world. They're trying to destroy this planet. They're trying to take the gem with special powers. That's a villain you can't relate to. You can enjoy the villain. But a villain in our real life could be a parent, or it can be a good friend, or it can be a spouse is the villain of your life. Or it could be your own self-destructive behavior and tendencies. It can be your own greed. So I think what Scorsese is saying is that in the real power of film, the true power of film, is to depict humanity as an art form, and the human experience, the human condition as an art form, to really translate what it means to be a human being, what it means to be a person, and the stories of just any kind of human being onto film. And now a person with superpowers is not... No one in the real world has superpowers, but people in the real world have abusive husbands, or they have whatever other conflicts that you see in another Scorsese movie. And so I think that's what he's saying, is that the true power and the true purpose of film is to portray the human condition as an art form, and then that can get lost on the extravagance of these big, huge budget, sci-fi, superpower, whatever extravaganzas, and the human element is eliminated.
Yeah, I also think that the corporate control is something that Scorsese recognizes. I mean, again, we love Man of Steel, love superhero movies. They're so fun.
I love Infinity War. I love it.
But I think Scorsese recognizes that over the last 5 years, the intense corporate takeover of all of this medium, all of these IPs, not only are they producing a crazy amount of content that's almost impossible to watch, they're also, these same corporations, they own, we talked about this recently just off the show, these same corporations that own these studios now and make all this content, all these movies, every couple months a movie comes out, every month a new TV show comes out. They also own all of these journalistic institutions and websites, entertainment platforms that are telling you to watch what they're making. So it's kind of like a huge cycle that I'm sure a lot of filmmakers are recognizing, a lot of people and audiences are recognizing, where, you know, this giant corporation owns everything. They're producing all this crazy amount of content, and also they own all these social media platform entertainment websites and journals and newspapers, and these are telling you to watch telling you to watch everything. So like now they're telling you what to watch, and also if you don't watch it, then you're not part of the club. If you don't watch it, you're like not a good person in a lot of ways. If you don't watch every single thing they come out with, then you just don't get it, and you're not part of like pop culture anymore, which is odd, because I think pop culture is so important to people more now than ever to consume the same media that everyone else is consuming. And if you're not consuming that media, it's more meaningful in your life if you don't, you're not part of that club. I think it's just like Scorsese and a lot of people see this kind of endless cycle of content it's just being corporate controlled, corporate run, and that it's almost impossible to escape in a lot of ways. I think that he sees that as an amusement park, which is why he says that.
And I also think it's a bad thing that only a few companies have bought up all of the studios, and you have one company owning the majority of content. And I mean, Disney owns Fox now, and they own Pixar, and they own Star Wars.
20th Century Studios.
Yeah, is that a good thing? It's something to ask. And also, like, I feel like the movies that people really should be seeing aren't being seen anymore in a lot of ways. I think a perfect example is the movie Till that came out this past month, which has earned less than $10 million at the box office. I think right now it's at $8 million. It's been out for a month.
About the story of Emmett Till.
Yeah, Emmett Till, a powerful, resonant story that is extremely relevant and I think should be viewed by as many people as possible, but nobody's seen it. if you look at if you add that up, its box office, less than 1 million people have seen it. But then every major studio movie that's been coming out, whether you have Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, or the one that just came out before it,
Doctor Strange,
Thor:
Love and Thunder,
Black Adam, Thor: Love and Thunder, they're making so much money, and it seems to be like a movie like Till, which seems like it would be such an important film to the culture and to the zeitgeist, and something that everyone should see. Nobody has an interest in seeing, and I find that worrying. And I think it's definitely a testament to the problem of the corporatization of the industry, where their advertising and marketing is so prevalent and so invasive on every aspect of media, where a movie like Till doesn't even get the recognition it should get, not even close to it, and that's worrying. You know what I mean?
I think Scorsese also has a huge opinion on, and I believe this as well, where these huge franchise movies, so many come out a year now. We're talking like 10 a year, big budget, blockbuster franchise films. They take up so much space in movie theaters. That movie like Till, or so many other independent films, or new young directors, their movies don't really stand a chance. Just like what happened to him with Mean Streets. It didn't stand a chance against The Exorcist and these other big movies. These new filmmakers, these great independent films, sometimes we get a diamond in the rough that a lot of people go see. Like Everything Everywhere All at Once had a great box office, made $100 million. But not every movie did that well. I mean, The Northman didn't make a ton of money in the box office this year. That was a great film.
Tar did terrible.
Tar was
Banshees of Inisherin did terrible.
Yeah. These are great movies, some of the best of the year that people aren't seeing because so much space is getting taken up, not just in the box office for theaters that are showing all these bigger movies, but also the advertising goes to the big movies. No one's seeing them. I think that's Martin Scorsese's biggest concern is these movies that people should be seeing that used to get lots of butts in seats and be seen by audiences aren't getting seen anymore.
And also, and
what does that do to the film?
Yeah. So, and also what the audience wants. So this clearly doesn't apply to the people who listen to our show, because we know you all listen to us because you love film, because we talk about all sorts of film.
And we love superhero movies too.
Yeah. But what worries me is that especially the younger crowds of moviegoers, is because they've grown up with just these kinds of films. That's really what it seems to be all they want to watch. And this obviously doesn't apply to our listeners, because we've talked about every kind of movie and and you all still listen. But general audiences, especially the younger crowds, it seems like they don't have any interest in watching anything that doesn't involve people with super abilities. And when I say super abilities, that still Star Wars counts. It's not just Marvel and DC, but Star Wars, and then you have The Boys, and there's Invincible, and every outlet seems to have major superpower being properties, and it seems to be like an endless stream of superpowered content. And I don't think it's the fault of the audience, because I mean, if I grew up watching these things, that's all I would want to watch, I mean, and because there's so much of it. Like when we grew up, there was Spider-Man, there's Batman.
Not really. I mean, Batman before we were like old enough, like we saw them, but like we were still little kids. We had Spider-Man, I guess, and then Batman didn't come out. Batman Begins didn't come out till we were 15. In
terms of superhero movies, there were like a handful.
I think that's why we were really lucky, because we started getting really into film like from like 12 to 15, like going through great filmographies of directors and like getting into like Tarantino and Scorsese.
Yeah. But now there's like 3 or 4 major superhero properties, it seems like, per month, whether it be movies or TV.
It's more than that.
Yeah, more than that. And so this goes back to what film is and what he's talking about,
what cinema
is. And I look at cinema, it's the art of portraying the human condition in its greatest form. And like I said earlier, the human condition does not involve superpowers. It does not involve crazy, extravagant fantasy stuff happening. And the human condition, it's very personal and it's very real. and it's authentic, and it's about conflicts that happen day to day. And I think that the power of film can really translate humanity with its storytelling. And so it seems as though the idea of what a film is can be seen as transforming into something that doesn't have the same intention as real film does. And I suppose that's what he's getting at.
Yeah, I think so too. I think cinema is very powerful. Marvel movies are still movies. DC movies are still movies. But I think I think we're doing a good job of translating maybe what Martin Scorsese's perspective is on his quotes and his issues. Not even issues, just his perspective and subjective opinion about superhero movies.
All right, I got something to change the tone.
All right, what do you got? We had to talk about it.
Yeah, we had to bring it up. You taking Scorsese and De Niro or Scorsese and DiCaprio?
That is such a good question. Oh my gosh, because so De Niro and Scorsese made 8 movies together, right?
So we have New York, New York, Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, The King of Comedy, The Irishman, Goodfellas, Mean Streets, and Cape Fear. And then for DiCaprio, we have The Departed, Gangs of New York, Wolf of Wall Street, The Aviator, and Shutter Island.
And then Killers of the Flower Moon coming out next year.
Yes.
Honestly, man, it's so hard to pick. It's honestly, it's potato. You know, both have been some part of some of the greatest movies of all time with Scorsese. You know, how can you not choose Goodfellas, though, and Taxi Driver? Because those are 2 of the best movies of all time. And I think what Scorsese and Leo have done is just as impressive as what he did with De Niro. Both are all-time careers with either one.
Pick one.
I have to pick De Niro. I gotta pick De Niro because I can't say no to Goodfellas and I can't say no to Taxi Driver. Even though New York, New York is maybe Marty's weakest film, I think I gotta go De Niro just for a couple of the performances, let alone all of them. And Raging Bull.
I'm also going De Niro because of those 3. I mean, Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, Goodfellas, unbelievable. It's unbelievable. So you got to go with that. Honestly, it's a no-brainer, I think. Because then you get, just for fun, you get The King of Comedy
for shits
and
and gigs.
Irishman.
I think that, so those are the 3 best movies in Marty's filmography, probably. But you could say that in terms of like a batting average, the movies he's made with Leo are more consistently better than the movies he made with De Niro. I mean, Gangs of New York, The Aviator, The Departed. I'm sure Killers of the Flower Moon is going to be incredible. Wolf of Wall Street, Shutter Island, and then what else has he made?
I mean, I disagree. I think Cape Fear is amazing. I think Mean Streets is amazing, and I think King of Comedy is amazing. I understand what you're saying, but I think I love those movies.
No, I love them too. I also
them.
love the Leo movies.
Yeah, me too.
I think that those are the 3 best, but I think Leo and Marty have a better batting average.
I understand what you're
but
saying.
I would still pick De Niro and Martin.
I understand what you're saying, yeah.
Like if you're signing this to a contract for like a baseball player, like Martin and Leo, they'll probably get you to the championship more often than Leo and Martin and De Niro.
But you weren't not guaranteed to win.
But you'll win. You'll win 3 championships
for
with De
sure.
Niro and Martin.
For sure.
Maybe 1 or 2.
You might win one with DiCaprio, yeah.
So, but I think that it's so hard to pick, but you can't turn down Goodfellas and Taxi Driver and Raging Bull.
I think those 3 just make it easy choice.
Absurd filmographies for both sides.
Yeah.
Absurd.
Isn't that crazy? Like if just one filmmaker made one of those lists, they would be an all-timer.
They would be.
Like if they just made the De Niro movies or if they just made the Leo movies, they'd be an all-timer director.
It's like Tom Brady. He's got 3 Hall of Fame careers in his time.
Tom Brady
being
reference.
A player. Martin Scorsese has like 3 Hall of Fame filmographies.
Yeah.
With different actors, or 2 Hall of Fame filmographies with those 2.
Yeah, he's the greatest ever, man.
It's nuts.
He's the GOAT. He's the GOAT.
But I think some of his movies with Leo are still very underrated films. I think Gangs of New York and The Aviator are so underwhelmingly talked about.
So underwhelmingly.
They're phenomenal films.
I agree. I completely agree.
And The Departed is phenomenal, but I think
it's wicked piss a guy.
You know, he won his best director nomination, his best director win for that. But that was also, it felt like kind of like the Brad Pitt win with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
I gotta say,
all-time great legend.
I love Brad, but like that was a weak year for supporting actor nominations.
I think it's just one of those things. Timing's great, and also it's kind of like the
yeah.
honorary Oscar. Here, we'll finally give you the award, which you should have gotten a few years before for sure. I think that happened to both Brad and Martin Scorsese.
Yeah, Brad's given better performances, I think.
I think he's great in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but like for his Oscar-winning role, like I wouldn't say that at all.
Yeah, me either. I mean, you look at back in retrospect.
Dude, Tyler Durden's like such a great role.
12 Monkeys, he's great. Yeah, just yeah.
It's just one of those things. It's just like, here's your treat finally. Martin, you're 64 and you've made 17 movies. Here, finally you can have an Oscar. You're welcome.
Sorry.
Sorry it's been so long.
Sorry.
That's why whenever like people get upset because of recency bias, they want like these new young filmmakers to like win Oscars immediately.
Oh my God.
Martin Scorsese didn't win an Oscar until 2006. 2006.
What's the term if someone snubbed? The number of the reactions of snubs people have nowadays is so immediate. It's like if a filmmaker doesn't get nominated for their second movie, it's like, snubbed! How is this possible? It's like, bro, Stanley Kubrick never won an Oscar for Best Director. You realize that, right? He never won Director.
He's never won an Oscar.
And then
just an honorary Oscar.
And then Scorsese didn't win until The Departed. Like, are you kidding? Relax with the early snubs.
Marty might be the most snubbed director of all time.
He is.
Not just Best Director nominations and wins, but in terms of awards his movies got.
Yeah.
So many movies of his got like 8 or
not win
7
Best
or
Picture.
8. So many would get 7, 8, 10 nominations, walking away with nothing. Maybe one win for a supporting actor or actress.
Yeah, because like an example, I think Steve McQueen should have won Best Director, but 12 Years a Slave won Best Picture. I think it should have won, but he should have won Best Director. Though,
Yeah,
but
100%.
He didn't. And also, I think Barry Jenkins should have won Best Director for Moonlight, but he didn't win. But it won Best Picture.
Mm-hmm.
So those are examples where the filmmaker didn't win, but their film won. You know what I mean?
Just like Ben with Argo.
Yeah, exactly. Same thing.
Didn't even get nominated for Best Director, I don't think.
He got nominated.
Did he?
No.
I'm not 100% sure he got nominated.
Actually, I don't think he did.
I think he got no nomination, but it won Best Picture, and he went up and accepted it himself.
Yeah. But then also you look at someone like Chris Nolan, and I mean, how did he not win Best Director for Inception?
Sometimes the timing just doesn't work out.
Yeah.
I think that's a major factor.
What an achievement. He won the DGA award, but like what an achievement of filmmaking that movie was.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're not a fan of it, you can't deny like the directing
Best made movie
was like is like fucking unbelievable.
Really good movie.
It's wicked piss. I got.
All right, this episode has gone on for where are we at?
3 hours?
Like 3.5 hours almost.
Wow.
All right, and that means I guess we'll just wrap it up here at over a 3-hour episode on the phenomenal career of Martin Scorsese. I feel like there's still more to talk about, but I think we covered a lot.
What's your favorite movie of Scorsese's?
Goodfellas.
Goodfellas, nice.
Goodfellas, 100%.
I'm gonna pick the same.
Over Taxi Driver.
Well, I think Taxi Driver is his best movie.
Yeah.
But the rewatch value of Goodfellas is unbelievable.
I've shown Goodfellas for the first time to a couple people. I've shown them their first viewing of it. And both times I've shown it to them, they've been like top 10 of my list of all time, like all-time favorite movie, top 10.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, the first time they watch Goodfellas, they put it up there immediately.
And then also Goodfellas, it really has the DNA of him in it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's nothing like it.
Yeah.
There's nothing like Goodfellas. Wolf of Wall Street's kind of close, but like Goodfellas, it's just in a league of its own.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's one of my favorite of all time. It's my favorite Scorsese movie. It's cliche to say, but it's his
The
best.
mobster.
It's amazing. Movie. It's Goodfellas. Come on. All right, thank you so much for tuning in to this super long episode of Raiders of the Lost podcast. Please become a patron today at patreon.com/Raiders of the Lost podcast. Take care, everybody.
See you next time.
This episode of Raiders of the Lost podcast was executive produced by our chosen one patrons: Luke Exelston, Tyler McFly, Darren Singleton, Anthony DeMeo, John Agraz, Becca Keene, Cody Moen, Benjamin Cook, Calvin Cam. Thank you for watching Raiders of the Lost podcast. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button as well, notifications for sure. Listen to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, everywhere you can listen to podcasts, and be sure to check out this other content we have on our YouTube channel.